but we glad to see so many of our board members here, even if it is their last time. We'll skip roll call tonight. Next thing is consent items. Does anybody have any questions or discussion about any of the items listed under the consent items so far? All right, seeing no lights, we'll move on to new business. Strategic plan creativity suggestions. I'll turn that over to you, Dr. Marzak.
Thank you, ma'am. As detailed in here, as per the Murray County Public Schools School Board Strategic Plan, Section 3.1, 3.5, 3.6, and 3.0, I was tasked with soliciting feedback from the community on creative improvement ideas for the district. So the first round of ideas are to be proposed to the school board and the superintendent or principals meetings from staff, students, families, and the community for consideration. So attached are the submissions collected May through July. And then as an executive team, we met, and the selected improvement ideas are located at the bottom of the form. So what happens from here, as far as the strategic plan is concerned, we now come up with a way to try to fund these for the 2019-2020 year. Some of the ones we're going to try to get in earlier than that, of course. So if you'll see, some people talked about buddy benches and parent-teacher conferences, changing some of those things. Lisa Ventura is already working on some of the ones with gifted and ELL students. So we're going to try to get these in sooner, but ones that may need budget consideration may need to be held off until the FY20 year. But it was completed as per the strategic plan, so just reporting out to the board.
Any questions from board members? So you're saying that all the ones at the bottom are the ones that you're definitely doing?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, those are the ones we decided as a team to move on, yes.
And from a budget standpoint, the budget impact for those items is?
Well, what we're going to try to do, at this point, what we did is we collected the ones and we're going to try to see which ones we can fit in earlier that are free, because free is in the budget. But for the ones that, for example, the buddy benches. So we may try to reach out to local agencies like the Boy Scouts and other agencies to see if they can donate those types of things to the district. So they weren't supposed to be implemented until the FY20 year. We collect the information, and then we try to implement it in the following year as per the strategic plan. But we're going to try to get them in sooner than rather than later. But right now, there should be no budgetary impact for this year.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We'll move on to, seeing no lights, we'll move on to administrator salary schedule. Discussion. That's something that's come up in the past, so this is our chance to discuss if we want to. Ms. Genzo?
I think if you all will look at it and you see that it's an equitable way to determine salary. Number one, as teachers, we determine salary based on degrees, number of years experience, and all of that. So that is in effect here. Then 10 month, 11 month, 12 months, how many people they supervise. Obviously, there's a difference in whether you supervise 80 or you supervise 20. A lot more evaluations, a lot more responsibility. So that's kind of the way it's been this way always. And it's an equitable way for principals and assistant principals and all to know where they fall on the salary schedule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think we've got some employees that don't normally fit that routine. They don't hold teachers' certificates, and then their pay may have exceeded the so-called salary schedule because of the expertise they hold in their particular job. And so I think we need to decide if there's some employees that are not going to be the supervisor salary schedule shouldn't be applicable to.
just an FYI, these are clearly state elementary, school principal salary index. You keep going, middle school, high school. It doesn't say anything about anyone else. But you're right. This is applicable to those employees that hold a teaching certificate. I don't know of any principal that would be a principal if they didn't have a teaching certificate or be licensed anyway. So it's clearly, now supervisors in the central office have a different sort of thing as well, but those are also positions that require a license, I think.
Thank you, ma'am. And I agree with what Mr. Dudley said. I think that we need to address, the ones that doesn't fall under to have a license or teacher's certificates. So I think that's one thing that we need to address as a board.
I think it would be helpful if we sought some input from somebody. I'm not an HR expert, but I feel like some of this is our responsibility. But I would I think it might be helpful to have some other eyes on this, and also an idea of what other districts do for these positions. I just feel like there's more information that I really need, but I do think that if we have this, much like we do with the teachers, then I would anticipate that it's followed. And if it's not going to be followed, then I just don't think that we can pick and choose. I think this has to be something that we feel strongly about and follow. Mr. Pennings.
I agree with you, Ms. Parker. We need a lot more information. We need somebody in HR to tell us how much a CFO is worth that handles our kind of funds. I'm not picking on anybody, but how much Dr. Woodard's position is worth, how much Amanda's position is worth. We need somebody with more expertise to tell us that than we can see here on the printed.
We actually brought that to you all last year, but I can definitely update that and get another comparison study done.
I almost think that for their positions there has to be a high end and a low end, because you might not have anybody that, it's got to be market, because you might not have anybody that applies for it. And if we need we need the position filled, there has to be some leeway in there, rather than just saying, this is what we're gonna pay. What happens if you have a position that you can't fill at that pay scale? So I just think there has to be some kind of leeway or something in there that we can, but I agree, I think that we need someone to look at it and see what current market is for those kind of positions.
Ms. Morency, I don't disagree with you that we need some leeway, but I also think we have to continue to live within our means. And so, I think increasing salaries 50% is not really living within our means. Even though that may be what we may feel like we need to pay in order to get somebody in that position, I think my understanding is Murray County government, they have a pay scale as well, and they follow it. I don't understand why we need this much, the degree of leeway that we seem to have had in the past. Mr. Bates.
I was just going to ask staff, so I understand that, I guess by state law, we're required to have some amount of differentiated pay for teachers. Do we also have any type of policy or practice of differentiated pay for principals? So we don't have anything said at this time. And I guess what I would like for us to look at as a board, and I'm coming from a business background, so I guess where I look at things, you get paid what you do. you know. And I guess, I think if you have some principals that are doing a fantastic job and they're taking their schools from, you know, their reading is at one level and they're showing increases, or they're showing increases in math, it makes sense to me that that individual should be getting paid more than if there's a principal in another school that their numbers are going down. To me, that just doesn't seem fair that they would be paid the same amount, because I think what we want as a school system, and this is our mission, this is our vision, this is our strategic plan, is we want to see improvements in those areas. And so to me, if you have an employee that's busting their butt and they're doing exactly what the board is wanting to see accomplished, I think they ought to get paid more. And so what I would like for the board to take a look at, instead of maybe making adjustments to the scale, I think we ought to set something as a base, and we ought to put that in policy. It ought to be clear so there's no uncertainties. Maybe the board could adopt something like these appendixes and put something in policy. It may, to Mr. Dudley's point, I think there probably needs to be another appendix on some positions don't really fit into the normal, you know, degree type approach. But once that is in place, I would like to see the board look at some differentiated pay, some bonus type things, that it's not just a one size fits all. Yes, we do look at seniority. We do reward loyalty, that an employee is going to be sticking with the district and they're going to go up in pay scale. But I think we also ought to look at rewarding hard work and results. So that's what I would like for the board to maybe take a look at as part of this discussion.
Well, I hate to call it names, but we've definitely got some employees that don't fit the norm, and Mr. Brady is one of them. You know, I think he has. Some people feel like he's making too much, but if I look, he has saved us far more than what the additional cost for his salary is. Our financial officer, I think one reason the board was willing to pay that position more than what we had in the past. Our past financial officers ended up costing us over $1 million. By the time we got our payroll issues cleared up and we got our everything squared away with VACO, it cost us a fortune. And so there's some positions that are going to be outside the norm that we have to look at paying more. I don't know when the last time there were any increases in this financial package. You know, maybe what we're even paying our principals now may be below par. So, you know, we really need to look at all this and take everything into consideration. And once we establish a policy, I do agree that we should stay within the parameters of what that policy is. We shouldn't go out of bounds without coming back and getting board approval.
Ms. Kinzer.
I think we're really discussing those classified positions that don't require just like Karen and Stan, that's really our discussion. When you, Mr. Bates, when you bring up maybe rewards for principals or something with great scores, then you've got to make it apples to apples. You've got to be sure there's equity there, that all the class sizes are the same, that you're not talking about a school that has very small classes as opposed to one with very big classes. It's not equitable. So you get into a really slippery slope trying to do that. And so I agree that I think we need something in writing about these classified administrative positions, whether it's a classified, and I'm not really sure, Dr. Woodard, if your position, I'm just asking if it requires, I know you have a certificate, but, so I think we're talking about the CFO, the CEO, well, CFO, and we're talking about HR, we're talking about Stan's position, maybe Tommy's position, and Eric Perryman's position. And so I would think that looking into other surrounding counties and seeing just what, and I think we did do that to some degree, and see what the high and the low and what's in between, so that we would know that whatever it is, it wouldn't go beyond. If it's a first year, someone you're bringing in that's new to the position, you'd go with the low end and so forth. But I do think we need to have something in writing, and so that we know what we're doing, and we know what to expect and know how to budget it, because, that's important. We got to pay for it. That's the big thing.
Thank you, ma'am. Over the years, I've worked with federal government, state government, and they have a set pay scale. And you can be doing the best job possible, and somebody else be goofing off all the time. But if you got the same time, same education, same everything, you're going to get paid the same thing. And I mean, that's both state and federal. Now, we talked to our attorney, but I believe that we're going to have to follow the state guidelines and federal guidelines. We can't just give one, big pay raise because they're doing a great job. And like Ms. Kendra said, everything has got to be equal, but, we don't have that in this organization.
I had it on once. I'm not an attorney either, but I do know my years as a union rep. You have to meet the federal standards and state standards for the pay scale, but there's nothing that the state or federal government says that you can't go above it. You can't go below their standards, but you can always go above it. Same thing, it's like your Family Medical Leave Act. There's certain standards you have to meet, the lowest standards, but you can have more than those standards or better than those standards in your contract. So you can go above them, you just can't go below them.
Yeah, but whenever you go above them, then there's got to be some type of promotion or something like that. It's got to be something to differentiate between
I agree. Something does have to differentiate between the lowest paid person in the same position and the highest paid position, and that would be what Mr. Bates alluded to, is performance. If you have somebody that's a principal in the same size school, same size classes, one principal is way up here as far as grade level goes and test scores, and the other principal is way down here, something's not right. And they're both making the same money. If I'm up here, and a normal human being's gonna say, well, why am I working so hard to keep my students so well informed, and this guy down here, he's just floating along in the breeze, but he's making the same money. You gotta be able to pay the people that perform more than the people, or get rid of the people that don't perform. One or the other, but you can't pay everybody the same. It just doesn't work most of the time.
But how many schools do we have that are totally equal? Yeah. Of number of students, number of teachers, everything.
I'm not saying we have. I'm just saying you can't put stuff like that in stone. You put something like that in stone, it's going to come back to hit you in the head. It can't be written in stone that this is all you can do and no more. It just can't.
And I think from a state standpoint, I think if we want to, we absolutely can have differentiated pay. I mean, the state has actually passed laws that allows us to do that with teachers. So it's fundamental we can do that with principals if we wanted to. Now, that's a question for the board to determine whether we want to or not. Now, for me, again, I'm coming at things from a business standpoint. If I'm busting my butt and I'm doing my job, and then the next guy is kind of slacking, I don't think it's fair for them to be paid the same. Now, as far as comparing apples to apples and oranges, the state already has a good system in place to be able to do that. It's TVAS. So it's not a luck of the draw under TVAS whether you get a bunch of smart kids or you get some kids that are struggling. The way that system works is show improvement. I mean, if you may have all-star kids that come into your classroom. They may be all A students, but if you did not progress them and they fall behind, instead of an A plus, they get an A, then it's a 1. You went backwards. That's the way the state testing does. But if you take, even if you're in an underprivileged situation and the students are struggling, if you can show improvement, that's a 5. So the state already recognizes a system of being able to try to compare apples to apples and oranges and oranges. But I think we have to recognize in our district, we don't compare very well with our sister counties right now. And some of those sister counties have very much higher underprivileged situations than us, and we're still struggling. So we've got to get there. We've got to make improvement. I think it's, and again, it's up to the board if the board wants to do that or not, but I think it's a fair thing, and it's a good thing that fulfills our mission. If we're trying to get better scores, if we're trying to get better in reading, if we're trying to get better math, it just goes to reason that you ought to pay those principals a little more if they are showing success. So.
Dr. Marzak, Dr. Woodard, with regards to teachers and differentiated pay, is that something that the board has to approve, though, how you differentiate pay between teachers?
Yeah, it's approved by the state. It's a state model, and I never brought it before the board in Oak Ridge, and I don't think we've ever brought it before the board here. The state says, how do you intend to do it? We send back the plan, the state approves it, and then we go from there. So it doesn't come before the board, no ma'am.
I will say that prior to you, I know that we did approve it as a board.
Differentiated pay? You did?
Yes, we did. I think Mr. Gaines. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. So if you haven't changed it, then the differentiated pay plan from that original one, then you haven't had to bring it back before us. I mean, you haven't brought it back before us, correct?
No, we haven't. No. When do we submit that? Is it September?
We submit that sometime in June, but the plan is basically to pay for teacher leadership. That's what it's designed for. It's for teacher leadership. So if I'm not mistaken, Scott, it's the same plan that we have been using for a couple of years. So that's what we've been doing. Do you want the dollar amount on that?
No, I don't need the dollar amount on it. Thank you. But I did just want to clarify that the board did have some input on the teacher differentiated pay side. So I'm thinking if we wanted to do it from a principal side, it would make sense for the board to have some discussion about that in the future. Anything further? I know this isn't something that we're going to reach a resolution on tonight. Obviously, we need some more information and maybe some other experts' opinions. But at least we can start that process and continue it. It'll roll back on for next month. Discussion of staff LOE, which it might be helpful on. I know we like to use abbreviations on our stuff, but it would probably be helpful for our public if we don't do that. I think that's level of effectiveness. Yeah. You thought we were going to give a discussion of staff love. Well, instead, we're going to talk about ones and twos, I think. That was some information that had come up during the budget process, and board members had asked for information on that. So any questions on it? I think Ms. Morency.
I just have a request. Shirley gave us, when we came on the board, she gave us a list of all the abbreviations. Shirley, could you get those for our new board members, please? Thank you.
My guess for the old ones I've lost now.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to pull documents up here, so Can somebody kind of run through what I'm looking at here? There's it's just the count of the number of teachers that are in our district that have, for the years on these two reports. Sorry, I'm flipping back and forth between things.
Right, those are just the counts. We have to be careful with any information that can make those teachers identifiable, and so that's why we just gave numbers.
Okay. I guess I would start my discussion off on this is just in the simple terms. I would like to see us striving for excellence in this district. And I'm not sure how, and again, I'm new to some of this process, so if somebody can explain some of this to me, that would be great. But it would seem like if you would have someone, and this is hypothetical, I don't see that because we don't have these tied together. But if you have a teacher that is deemed as a level 1 or 2 for multiple years in a row, how is that helping our district, that we keep them in this district? If somebody could, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's kind of not. Because I'm just not sure, and I don't know, I don't remember having been on the board for the last 4 years that we have a lot of these being brought to us to be dismissed when that happens. So either we are unintentionally keeping these teachers, ineffective teachers, on staff, or we're intentionally keeping them. And I would hope, well, I would rather it be neither of those answers, but I'm hoping it's unintentional and that from this point forward we can start being very intentional that we do not want to keep ineffective teachers in our classrooms. I kind of make it personal. When I look at a child, and we've talked about this many times about children that, one bad year with an ineffective teacher it takes several years to get that back if you can. 2 bad years in a row, and the statistics pretty much say you cannot recover from that. And I start to think about if a student gets 2 level 1 teachers in a row, we've effectively ruined their education, and to put it in pretty big terms. And that's kind of troubling to me. So I don't know if staff could give some input on what maybe they think we could do moving forward on this. I just personally don't find it acceptable that we would keep, and again, I want to be clear on, I know there's a process for trying to work with teachers to get them up and get them moving in the right direction, but I'm talking about the ones that are maintaining a low level of, they're ineffective teachers. And I don't know if staff could give me some guidance on what do they think maybe we could start doing to address that moving forward.
I'll address some of that, Mr. Moore. Thank you. I echo your sentiment. First and foremost, the philosophy that we have from an instruction standpoint is that we want to help people improve their performance. That's first and foremost. So we want to help teachers improve. We offer lots of professional development to help teachers improve. And just for the sake of everyone that's here listening, the LOE, or level of effectiveness score, is made up of 35% of the teacher's growth score, which is combined of what students improving or not improving the scale scores, which create the TBOS, and then 15% of that is achievement, and the other 50% of that LOE score is based upon principal observations, those observations that principals do when they come into classrooms. So that's what makes up the level of effectiveness score. And so after the test scores come in and everything is calculated, then of course it generates a score, and that score is either going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, or a 5. And of course, based on the new state law, I think that came out in 2012, it said that if a teacher has tenure, and if they have been a level 1 or 2 for 2 consecutive years, then tenure can be removed. For teachers who have been tenured prior to that, then it would just be standard dismissal proceedings, where we have to bring a teacher up on dismissal charges for one of the big 5, which would be inefficiency, neglect, unprofessional conduct, all of those. So that's kind of how that works. But I echo your sentiment. We do want to help teachers improve, and the ones that cannot improve, I don't think that we have any choice in the matter but to move in that direction if they do not improve after repeated attempts. I think the first thing that's important also is before we get to that step, putting teachers on some type of plan, on an improvement plan, will be a key critical step. And we've had those critical conversations with our principals, and we're going to continue to work with them on that. As a matter of fact, that was one of the topics that we discussed at the Leadership Institute this summer, is how to begin looking at that process. Again, critically, we want to help teachers improve, but of course, if they don't, then ultimately it will lend itself to looking at worst-case scenarios in terms of possible dismissal. If any of my colleagues would like to jump in, if you all want. Yes.
So, Mr. Moore, the way the law is written is that teachers have to receive 2 consecutive years of a level 1 or a level 2 to be considered for removal by either the principal and or the school system. The problem we've had in the last 3 years is we haven't had 2 successful years of standardized testing. If you'll remember, going back to the 15-16 year, the grade 3 through 8 standardized test was pulled by the state because of bad deployment by Measurement Incorporated. And then this past year for the 17-18 year, all test scores were nullified by the legislature so that nobody could be impacted negatively by the test scores. So the problem that we have is we haven't had 2 consecutive years of successful testing in the state of Tennessee, which has impacted 49.5.511, which has impacted that law. I can't, from what I've gathered from my colleagues, this hasn't been something that we were doing either before I got here, before 2015. And at this point, considering what the legislature did this past year, it will be the year 2020 before we can revisit this again, because it'll have to be a combination of the 2018-19 year and the 2019-20 year before this can be revisited again. But following Dr. Woodard's advice of working with principals, improvement plans, and looking at teachers to determine what we need to do to move forward with effective employees in the classroom, I think is a good course of action for now.
Mr. Pennings, did you? Okay, Mr. Beaver.
Dr. Woodard, on the evaluation, what percentage did you say? I missed it. The growth was 35%, the achievement was 15%. What was the? 50%. 50%, okay.
Ms. Martin?
Dr. Woodard, on the improvement plan, is it something that the principal comes up with at that campus on their own, or is it something standardized that you guys have to say, okay, you will be doing, you know, as you would do a student if they were, you know, academically challenged, you will do this, you will do this, you will do this, you will turn this in, you will attend this, you know, is that standardized from the central office, or is it a plan that principal of the campus comes up with for that particular individual teacher?
I'm going to defer that to my colleague here from HR, but I do have an answer I'd like to give you, but I want to kind of ask her to chime in first.
I mean, in the past, they've tried to, as best, customize it for the teacher. Now, I think team evaluation has some information they can use for that improvement plan. But of course, it's based on the rubric and how that particular teacher scores. So it's standardized to the point that the expectations are set out by the team rubric for all teachers. But depending on how that teacher scores is, of course, how that improvement plan and what they particularly need to improve on is how that improvement plan would be written.
And does that come back? Once the principal has set up that evaluation, is that something that's brought back to you guys before the next evaluation is done? Is there a follow-up? Is there, because I'm with him. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want, I said with him, Mr. Moore. I definitely wouldn't want us to continue to employ people that are subpar, and I definitely wouldn't want our county to have a reputation that we don't identify those needs and people can come here and be subpar. And then trickling down to parents being concerned, and even, I don't have children, but I can imagine that if I could get a hold of any information as to who was good and who wasn't, then I would be saying, you know what, I don't want my kid in that particular classroom, so I don't want us to get to a district to where parents are concerned as to which classrooms their children are going into. But once that principal does the evaluation and comes up with that plan, is there a follow-up from central office to make sure that those things have been taken care of before the next evaluation? Almost like a, you know, did you complete the assignments type?
The improvement plan would include follow-up. So what we like to do is create a plan that would be a district-wide kind of plan that every principal would use for any teacher that is not performing, which would include their strengths, which would include areas of deficiency, and specific directives on things that need to improve that are aligned to areas of the TN Ready or areas of the end of course test where they're not performing well, and or other stated deficiencies such as being tardy or missing deadlines, et cetera. So we would definitely have follow-up pieces to that. And then again, there would also be language in there that says that this would may result in termination. That language would need to be in there so that legally we've protected ourselves and we've made them aware of what this could come to up front. But ultimately, yes.
In looking at the numbers that y'all gave us from 15, 16, and then I guess 16, 17, it looked like we had 20 and 15, 16 that were 1s and 2s, and then by my count, in the following year, it was 35. So does that mean that we had 20 repeats, or are those new? I mean, it's hard to tell if those are repeat ones or not, and give some perspective.
Yes, ma'am. Chair Parker, when we looked at the 15, 16 and the 16, 17 data, I think we found 8 or 9 that were repeats. It was kind of a mixed bag. Some had high scores maybe in 2014, and then in 15, 16 they dropped, and then they came back up in 16, 17. So it was a kind of a mixed bag. But in terms of individuals that just did not do well, that were a 1 or 2 for 2 consecutive years, I think there were about 9 individuals between 15, 16, and 16, 17 that just were at a level of effectiveness of a 1 or 2 consecutively for those 2 years, back to back.
So one issue that was raised at the budget discussion is what oversight, and I think Ms. Martin was trying to allude to this, but what oversight is there from central office if we are continuing to employ 8 or 9 level 1 or level 2 consecutive year teachers? What help is being provided to those teachers, to those principals, to those students to make sure that they're not going to suffer? I mean, obviously it could be a fluke for anybody, but I think when you have transition in certain schools, do these improvement plans fall to the wayside? I think that's one of the concerns that was raised. So what are y'all doing from an instructional central office standpoint to oversee that when there is that type of transition?
This is new territory for us, I'll be honest. Starting this spring, I'd like to, going to partner a little more closely with HR to start looking at making some things happen at the end of the year. I know that looking at this now is tough, and we looked at some of this at budget time, and it's a tough time to look at some of this, but this is something that we need to be looking at now. Again, we've already started the framework with principals to develop those plans now, and principals should be identifying the individuals that they have in their building that this applies to now. So we're working on with our instructional leaders on developing the appropriate plans for those individuals. This is going to cause some a little bit of kickback, pushback, and we have to have some courageous conversations in some of our buildings with some people who are not performing as well. So this will be new ground. So we're working towards this, and it is a process. And I echo the sentiment of Mr. Moore and others who have said that if we have underperformance, we have to attack it and address it. So we're working on that. But again, we're offering a lot of professional development. We're looking at offering professional development by specific content strands for areas that we were weak on TN Ready and in our end of course tests. And my conversation with principals will be and has been that we get teachers the kind of assistance that they need so they can improve. Our goal is first to help them improve. But again, if we have individuals who do not improve after being given the opportunity to improve, then you have to have a plan. And so once they go on a plan, what I would call a plan of assistance for professional growth, they don't grow then, of course you have no choice but to start looking at more punitive types of measures. And again, we want that to be a last resort in our district and not something that we just jump to. But this is new water, new territory for us, and so we're navigating these waters. And we're doing it very carefully. So we ask for a little time to grow in this and for our instructional leaders to grow in this capacity.
Speaking of a timeline, what's a timeline that's reasonable for you to report back to us on some of those procedures that you're implementing as you work with HR and whatnot? And let me just say, the reason why I asked that is because I don't want to get phone calls like I started getting today about something that happened that all of a sudden, 1 or 2 days before, people felt like they got blindsided on an issue. I just want to make sure that, you know, we're having this discussion now. You're talking about making decisions at the end of the year. I don't want this to just come to us in May and say, well, this is what we've done all year, and then hear from people that it wasn't effective in their opinion as far as moving the needle for those particular teachers or those particular schools. So can you kind of prepare a plan and let us know what you're going to be doing this year to work with those teachers and those principals to make sure they are the instructional leaders?
Yes, ma'am, we could do that. Now, respectfully, I'll say this respectfully. We will develop a plan. I'll let you all see the plan of assistance for professional growth plan. But in terms of what that looks like and how we operate that, I believe that's more of a management kind of issue. And I'm just saying that very respectfully. But yes, seeing the plan, yes, but ultimately that comes back to management.
I don't disagree that it comes back to management, but you're telling me that management hasn't done this in the past. So before I get blindsided by my constituents, I'd just like to know what exactly just a general idea. I'm not asking for specifics. I'm not asking for teachers' names. I'm not asking, but I do think that it's helpful for all of us to know that this isn't something that come April somebody's going to walk in and say, well, you were a level 1 or 2 teacher for 2 consecutive years, and we don't think that you need to be in this district anymore. And when they call me and say, I had no idea, I didn't get any extra help, my principal never said anything to me about this, whatever that is, Dr. Woodard's staff never came in and asked what they could do to help me. I just want to be able to say we've done all that we can do. Because at the end of the day, I don't really care if these teachers are level 1s or level 2s last year. They may be level 5 this year, and I hope that they are. So I think, you know, part of that is also the evaluations and what you're doing on that end with principals being able to properly evaluate their teachers and make sure that they're looking for the right things that are going to move these kids forward. Ms. Morency?
I think his light's been on for a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
David.
Thank you. So, Dr. Woodard, if I understood correctly, so we have 8 or 9 teachers that were level 1 or 2 for the last 2 years in our district, consecutive years.
Yes, 15, 16, and 16, 17, yes.
And of all those 8 or 9, are they all still employed in our district?
I'll let Amanda speak on that as far as.
Right. As of right now, one is looking at retirement, and the other resigned. And that was just on their own.
So 6 still.
We should have 6, yes.
And I understand, I guess there's always unique situations that maybe we're not aware of, and so I never know exactly, you know, how to judge something until I know all the facts. But I think it's very concerning to me that from a likelihood standpoint, if we've had somebody that is an employee that's been level 1 or 2 for 2 consecutive years, yes, we hope that they improve, but in all likelihood, statistically speaking, they're probably not going to do too well this year. And what my concern is, yes, I believe in helping teachers, I believe in helping employees, but at some point, our obligation to these students have to kick in and override everything. We can hold people's hand for a certain amount of time, but at some point, we got to say enough's enough. And if our students are being impacted, yes, we're going to get the calls. Yes, we're going to have people that are upset. But sometimes we're just going to have to make those hard decisions. And I'm a little bit concerned that management hasn't made those decisions thus far. This is just one board member speaking. But I would like to see some more proactiveness by management that if you have an employee, and this is any business, this is not picking on teachers, this is any business. If you have some employees that are having difficulties for whatever reason, some at some point, you've got to make some adult decisions. And in fact, when you have those types of situations, it affects the other employees. It affects the other teachers, because you got to think there's some teachers that are out there busting their butt. They're doing a great job. And then the next year rolls over, and for whatever reason, those students that are coming into their class right now didn't get the attention and the care that they deserved. And that teacher has to struggle, and they shouldn't have to struggle. They should be walking through the door just as prepared as any student, as within that student's abilities. And I understand there's different varying degrees, but we owe it to the teachers in this district to not be throwing them curveballs and making their lives hard and difficult. So as far as this statute, I think, Mr. Superintendent, I would urge you to get with the board's attorney and talk a little bit more about that particular statute. My understanding of that new law was basically when you had underperformance for 2 years in a row, all that did was it removed tenure. But my understanding is inefficiency is being a statutory grounds for dismissal forever. And that was before the law, after the law. That's always been the case, that if an employee is not doing their job and they've been given the help, that management can make those decisions. Now, tenure versus tenure just means it can be more difficult if an employee has tenure to go through all those hoops. And what the legislature was saying is if there's two consecutive years in a row, we're going to make things more streamlined for management. We're going to remove some of the hoops that you have to jump through, and it's going to be a more streamlined process. But that role is fundamentally management's number one role, is making sure that we have good quality employees in our district, because that's what every employee, every board member, all of us want to aspire that we have top-notch quality employees. And in order to have quality employees, we're going to have high expectations. And if somebody's not pulling their weight, at some point, you have to have an adult discussion with them.
So what I'm understanding is there's 3 different groups as far as the teachers are concerned. You have your tenured teachers, your non-tenured teachers, and teachers that were hired before 2011. And they're treated 3 different ways. Non-tenured teachers can just be non-renewed at the end of the year, correct? Do we have 1 and 2 teachers that are non-tenured and have been renewed?
No, not 1s and 2s. We do have the non-renewal process, and administrators can take advantage of that if they have a low-performing teacher without tenure.
Well, that makes me feel better that we're not giving them 2 years, 1s and 2s, or 2 or 3 years, because it's a 5-year. They have to do that within 5 years, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Become tenured within 5 years, okay. Then tenured teachers that were hired after 2011, those, if they've been consecutively 1s and 2s for 2 years, you can rescind or put them on probation, take their tenure away from them, put them on probation, and give them a work plan. Do we have any 1s and 2s of those 6 that we have? Do we have any of those that are in that position?
That were hired after 2011 or received tenure after 2011?
Yes.
We do. Out of that, I think there's 2. I can get specific statistics, but I know that the majority of those were hired or actually received tenure prior to 2011.
Well, just my opinion, just stating my opinion, I think it might be a good awakening for those 2, and I have no idea who they are, but for those 2 to do that, and I think it'll set the policy, and then for the ones and put them on a plan. And then for the ones that were hired before 2011, definitely the plan. Just.
I agree with Ms. Morency. I mean, at least put them on notice. Because you're not only putting those on notice, you're putting everybody on notice. that, hey, we're not gonna put up with this anymore. This is our policy. You're on notice, either improve or you've got a bigger problem.
Some good discussion on this. I appreciate everybody on that. It's been nice. I know the comment was made that this some hard decisions. This to me is not hard decisions. I mean, these are kind of sticky at times, maybe. As someone who has my own employees that has been down this road before many times, when you have to have a tough discussion with somebody. But the discussion has to be made at the end of the day. And it's kind of, as Mr. Bates said, it's a little disappointing that as a district, we haven't been doing that in the past. Because again, I'm putting this back in the terms of what's best for the kids, to know that there have been kids that could have had, and we're just talking about what the data we have here, but there could be kids that have had low-level, underperforming teachers multiple years in a row. And that's just not fair to the kids. So, Dr. Woodard, I appreciate that you say it may take some time. I would like to see at some point a specific timeline of when this can happen, that we start making some serious movement on this as soon as possible. And while I understand that there are some legal hoops to jump through, I'll keep going back to the fact of the kids on this. This district is not here to employ people. It is here to educate kids. And it's definitely not here to employ people that are failing at the main mission and vision of what the school is. So I just don't think there's any way around that. This needs to happen. Again, as a board member, I don't see this as difficult. I think this is our duty, and I don't see any other board member that thinks this is something we shouldn't be able to support from the top down and support our administrators for making the calls that they should be making on this.
Thank you, man. Well, I'd like to say that I agree with Mr. Moore and Mr. Bates. We can't keep employing ineffective teachers. We recognize when we feel like they're ineffective, we need to go to them, offer them the help to improve. If they don't improve, I don't care what kind of feedback we get from the different schools, the ineffective teachers need to be on their way out. You know, they can go back to McDonald's and work or wherever, because maybe they don't need to be in the teaching profession. You know, let's give them a chance to improve. If they don't improve, let's make the tough decision and say it's time for you to find a new career.
I've appreciated this conversation. I've heard, you know, our theoretical plan of where we want to go, and I'm more aware of the legal side of this matter. You know, we've talked about our state scores, and we've identified that this is a management issue. I mean, I'm glad that we've summed all this up. But 5 years ago, I sat down with the principal and had a conversation that out of all the teachers, I felt like there was an outlier as far as classroom management and the teaching strategies that were being used. And the response I got was, oh, I know, we have that teacher on a growth plan. Well, that teacher's still there today. And of interest this summer, knowing that I had one entering that school, my mom was like, I hope you don't get this teacher, and went through every single thing that I'd had a problem with. And I just am trying to use that to impress upon y'all. 5 years of kids have gone through that. It was identified back then, growth plan, teacher's still there. 5 years of kids have gone through. And those of you that are looking at our scores, from the school that y'all probably know I'm talking about, I don't really think that we have 5 years to dally on that. But that teacher is getting the same paycheck as the teachers who are busting it, and that breaks my heart.
I was just going to echo Ms. Powers. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. I mean, we can't have that in our system. And what confounds me is going through how these scores are done. If I understood correctly, 50% of the score is by the principal. And so those principals know where the effective teachers are. They need a real pat on their back for doing a great job every day. And then they also know the teachers that are failing the students, and they're making everybody's life more difficult. And we need to see some leadership within central office, and there needs to be some leadership within the principals. I mean, if they know where the difficulties are and it's making everybody's life difficult and it's making them struggle, then it's time to cut some people loose. Now, we as a board, we're going to get a backlash from that. So just brace yourself. I mean, it all sounds great, but we can make policies, we can put things on paper. Until action goes with words, then it's ineffective. And we've got to be there to support the administrators when they make those tough decisions. When we get the nasty phone calls, we're going to have to defer that. Well, I don't know that situation. Maybe that principal does know best, and they made a hard decision that's best for the students. And I'm going to, even though I know the neighbors, and I may go to church with some of their friends, or I may even know them personally. I mean, some of these people that we're talking about may be our personal friends. But we've got to be willing to say, hey, I'm sorry. You know, our kids are worth more, our district is worth more, and we've got to make those hard decisions. And it's nothing personal against any of those employees or teachers. It's just that we've got to have those expectations, and we've got to say this is the bar, and we're going to raise the bar. And if you're not there at that bar, then we have to make some hard choices.
That was one of the questions I asked Dr. Marzak when you applied for this job. What are you going to do about ineffective teachers? And his answer was, and I believe it's quoted correctly, either take a seat on the bus or get off the bus. And I think that's what we have to do.
I think it's important that we do set the bar high and expect the bar to really be exceeded if we're going to continue to move forward. But I think those high expectations have to exist for everybody in our system. So I'm happy to take those phone calls as long as I know that everybody else is being held to a high standard. Anything further? We'll move on to instruction. Looks like we've got a copy of the graduation dates and the prom dates. Any questions on those two items? Moving on, EOC percentage recommendation. Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Woodard?
Thank you, Chair Parker. Board members, this is just a repeat of the recommendation that we made last year for end of course assessments, and it's the exact same percentage. So this is just a repeat of last year. After meeting with principals, the consensus of the group was 15%.
Is there any discussion from board members on that?
Do we currently have that in policy? I was thinking that when this came before us before, that we actually maybe adopted it in policy, but I could be wrong about that.
I think there was some discussion about it in policy. I don't know. I do remember talking about it, but I think we had to include some flexibility there just because of all the issues that we've had recently.
State board says that the board must approve whatever percentage that a school system decides to use, and that is based on all the issues that we've had. You can choose not to add it into the report cards, or you can choose to add it. So,
when's the last time it was actually added into a report card? Or the year before that, or the year before that? Mm-mm.
15, 16.
I don't even know that it was the first year that we were on because they got them late. Mm-hmm. Right. I will just say that I know that we have to do this per state law, but I really hate to hold these kids accountable when other people aren't being held accountable. There aren't high expectations, I don't feel like, in our State Department of Education to make sure that these kids get tested in a way that is beneficial to them and to us to get some usable data. Mr. Dudley.
Well, And I don't know. I think we still got some students that are not taking our testing seriously. I think we've got some, I understood, that on a 75-minute normal test walked out after 10 or 15 minutes. You know, I think we have to have it where the students take these tests seriously, and you know, so whatever we can do to improve that, I think we need to do.
Mr. Dudley, are you saying you want it to be higher than 15%, or are you comfortable with 15%?
If it would make the students take it more seriously, I would like to see it be more than 15%.
Okay.
That
Ms.
would require a policy change, because it's in policy 4.700 that it was voted for 18-19 for 15%.
So it is a policy.
Ms. Berncy?
I think the reason that some of the students didn't take it seriously is the way that they were notified before they took the test that it wasn't going to count.
Actually, we waited till the test was over to notify them. They were following tweets by our legislators and noticing that they were on the Hill talking about canceling the test. Test isn't going to matter, such and so forth.
Well,
but we intentionally waited.
I was under the impression that the reason that the students didn't take it serious, some of the students didn't take it seriously, is because they didn't think it was going to count, so they just, why put in the time?
Agreed.
So, I mean, I'm happy, I'm fine with 15%, but I do agree with you, Mr. Dudley, that there needs to be some skin in the game for them to take the test, some reason for them to do their best on the test.
Yes, ma'am.
We can keep this on the agenda since it doesn't necessarily look like there's consent to keep it at 15%, even though that will be policy. So, which I guess that will actually require multiple readings if we want to change that. So, we can vote on it at the board meeting and then bring back policy consistent with that. We have time for that.
It doesn't have to be determined until the end of the year. Since we're not on a block schedule, nobody's taking a test in December, so we've got time.
Okay. All right. Advanced placement. Course information. You want to speak to that?
Thank you. All right, so you are looking at the slides then that were uploaded here. Hang on one second. Okay, I'll use yours. All right, great. So AP report by school. If you go to the first slide, what we have is the raw numbers. AP enrollments is actually the number of seats that were available in an AP class. And so the reason why it's shown this way instead of the number of students is we find that students take more than one AP class. So we want to talk about how many were eligible to take a test. So I'm calling that enrollments. So if Johnny was enrolled in 3 different AP classes, that would be 3 enrollments, 3 chances to take the test. This is our raw numbers. So for example, there were 400 filled seats at Central and various AP classes. And of those 400, 94 got a 3, 4, or a 5. So that's just the raw number. On the next slide, I'll give you the percents, but this way you can look at it both ways. You can see that we had a great number of students at Central and at Spring Hill. Now, if we turn it into a percent, because of course we know those 2 schools have many more students, Okay, so a little bit higher. You can see that we have the actual percents that we're passing with a 3, 4, and 5 in 2017. 2017 is the light gray bar, and 2018 is the black bar. And while initially that might look, and indeed we are having a fewer percent passing, we have many more students taking the test this year. And that's a good thing, because last year we might have just had our best prepared students taking the test. We want all of our students to take the test because they'll get more experience as they take these tests. And in fact, I think these passing rates look pretty good given the huge increase in the number of students we had taken tests this year. Any questions on this slide?
Do we have any way, is there like a national, percentage that, is a mean that would, how many pass?
I could check that out and find out for you. I don't have that available now, but I'd be happy to look that up for you.
That would be helpful, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. Next slide, please. Here we have the raw number of AP tests for the enrollment. So we have 400 students enrolled at Central and a little over 200 taking that test. And so we can see that we have a fair amount of students all across the district taking those tests. And these are raw numbers. We had close to 400 students across the district taking AP tests in 2018. The next slide shows the percentage. So we had close to 60% of students, for example, at Central taking an AP test compared to just less than 40% last year at Central. And you can see that across pretty much that trend continues. And across the district, we had more than 60% of the students who are seated in an AP class taking an AP test versus less than 50% last year. Okay, next slide, please. Here I've put it all together. There's not really any new information here, except if you look at the box in the lower right. So basically what I've done is taken everything on the previous slide and put it together so you can see it all in one view. In the bottom right, we have the percent of students who took the test that got a passing grade. That's the new information on this slide. And you can see that our numbers in terms of the percent passing has certainly gone down in 2018, but again, that reflects a much larger number of students taking the test. So I would argue that we're at least getting our students who are in the class testing, and our next goal would be to bring up those scores.
I was just going to say, I was very pleased to see, it looks like it's an outstanding job of more students participating in AP. So the numbers, it looks like it did increase pretty substantially. So instead of looking at that last slide, it went from 537 to 640 students now taking AP courses. I guess what I was a little bit disappointed in is that the percent that are actually getting a passing grade has gone down tremendously. Went down from 55% of the kids that were taking AP courses getting a passing grade down to, looks like for the district, 36%. And so raw numbers, when we're looking at the raw numbers, I see that last year we had 139 students that got at least a 3, 4, or 5 on the AP. And this year that we barely moved the needle. We're up to 147. And so that's concerning to me because while AP is great, I'm not sure if they're not getting a passing grade in the AP course, how is that helping them in the admissions process, you know, putting those grades on their transcript, trying to get into colleges, those sorts of things. And so one thing I would like to see, and maybe you have this data readily in hand, or maybe you can maybe do some cross correlation, that sort of thing. But I would like to see the number of students that are taking the AP courses, is it making an impact on their ACT? So, I don't know how you would be able to sort through the data to see, is that making some sort of impact? If not, that does raise some I guess, questions in my mind as far as resources. Are we getting our best bang for our buck? Because the AP courses, I understand, you know, maybe we have to have more teachers to be able to do those sorts of things. Those class sizes may not be as big, that sort of thing. So we are devoting a lot of amount of resources. Are we getting a good bang for our buck where those students are doing better on the state test? Are they doing better on the ACT test? And I'd like to have that information, because if not, is there a better way for us to get a better bang for our buck? Should we be looking at ACT prep? Should we be looking at improving our core curriculum? Those sorts of things. So there's just some questions. I really appreciate the data, and that's the great thing about data. It allows you to be able to ask questions.
And those are great questions. I really do love those questions, and I appreciate that you voiced them. In terms of being able to tell whether or not that AP class helps students get a better grade on the ACT, unfortunately, that would be very difficult to tease apart. What you would probably see is that students who take an AP class do score higher on the ACT, but it's not probably because of that AP class. That may play a role, but to try and dissect that, we would need very evenly matched sample sets, and this is a research kind of program, and unfortunately we can't really, we don't really have that kind of data available. But I think what you said about, are there other ways to prepare our students better? I think it's not an either or. I think it's an and question. We want AP and we want ACT prep. We want as many students taking those AP tests as possible, and we want as many students improving in their ACT and having more rigorous materials available for them. In some ways, and now I'm just going to speak anecdotally because I taught AP when I taught in Chicago, and that rather than have just the students who got an A in my course take the test, I had all of my students take the test, and any that couldn't pay for it, I paid for, because as a teacher, I wanted that data. But that didn't really help our scores were still quite reasonable for every student taking the test, but it certainly would have been better if only my best prepared students took the test. And I think that we may have been seeing in years past just our best prepared students taking the test. Now we're seeing many more. So I would argue that we are on the right track, and we really need to pursue that and strategy.
I was going to say, so, but could you go back and, I guess we're having increases in the number of participation in AP. Would you be able to go back and look at each individual school to see if there's improvements on ACT from year to year? And that may not be a true, it's always difficult to make correlations, but I guess we would be able to maybe look back and say, okay, participation has increased, and by the way, more students are hitting their ACT benchmarks. And so there's at least maybe something happening, because for me, it would make me feel a lot better, because again, I see that we have more participation, but the number of students that are getting the passing grade is not really changing much. But I wouldn't feel so bad about that if I could see that, okay, even the students that are participating and maybe they're not getting a passing grade, it looks like it's still making an impact elsewhere. And so that would be helpful for me to have that type of data.
But it would be wonderful to have that type of data. I would love to have that type of data. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that play into that ACT. They have different preparation going on every year. And then you'll see that the classes themselves differ year to year. And so it would be very difficult to draw any kind of conclusion from that. I will continue to think about your question, though, because there may be some piece of data that I can dissect that might get it, as I understand the spirit of your question. And while in a practical term it may be difficult, I'll certainly keep that in mind as I look through the national data and think about maybe any ways that we could do that. But I do believe that in terms of college applications, colleges are actually our most selective colleges are starting to move away from the ACT as a number, and they're looking much more closely at the rigor of the classes that the students take. And so our students being willing to step into that AP classroom and stand up for that increased rigor will indeed help them at some of these very selective, and all colleges. I think they are really looking for that, because grades are very difficult to compare from one school to another. And I think that there are some populations that historically just do poorly on the ACT, whereas others do really well. And colleges are looking for a diverse student body, and so they are looking at other things besides an ACT score now. And so having the rigor of taking AP classes, I think, really will help our students.
Just a question either for Dr. Marzak or Dr. Woodard. I noticed that Cullioca in Hampshire had no AP classes last year. What was the reason for that? Was it offered?
I don't know.
I mean, was it offered and they didn't have enough? I just want to make sure.
Thought I had.
I'm just trying to make sure that all of our kids have the opportunity to take those AP classes if it works.
I was checking
They
the
can.
audience to see if one of
Okay.
them were here, but my understanding is that they did not offer. They didn't offer those courses. That's why. That's my understanding.
In a smaller school, they may only offer them every other year, and so that they would have enough to make a good class. Otherwise, it's difficult to offer a class with just a handful of students. I know they actually even do that at Spring Hill. I believe AP Biology is offered every other year to make sure that they have a full enrollment.
But I will ask and get that answer back to the board. I'll send it by email.
I just want to agree with you. I think that adding AC prep would be a way to help increase those scores. And as a former AP teacher, I don't think that AP Art really effectively affected their ACT score, but at the same time, the rigor of the course and all that they had to do, the written part of it, all that had to be help in all of that as well. But and AP classes are a concentrated study of a subject. The ACT is a comprehensive. It's many subjects. So I don't know that you could tie it to it particularly, but I do think students that take the AP are taking it a course that has greater rigor, greater course, and they should be encouraged absolutely to take the test. That's something this board has been concerned about, and I think that's something we need to continue. But I think AC Prep is what we should look at the schools.
Dr. Woodard, did you have a comment? No. Oh, okay. Sorry. How many additional AP courses are we offering this year? I think Mr. Bates does bring up somewhat of a valid point. I believe we added some AP classes this year.
I'd have to get back to you on that one, Chair Parker. We have added a couple of courses. I just don't know the exact number. I'll get back to you on it.
And you can just email us about that. But I do think that it is important for us to look at how we're doing on these. I do think that there's a lot of value to an AP class, particularly if you're a parent whose kid scored a 3, 4, or 5 and is going off to a college. that accepts that as credit and doesn't have to take English 1 or calculus or whatnot. Or art. They get their fine arts credit. So I think that is actually something that is of value that we can provide to our community. And also, I think maybe instead of looking at this and saying, well, we had more kids taking it, but we only went up 8, effectively 8 kids extra passing it when we had a lot more than 8 kids that started taking it. I think maybe we need to realize that the rigor is important, not just the year that you take the AP, but all 12 years that the kids are in school. Something like English, something like math, all those, science, any of those, they all build upon themselves to where if you had an ineffective teacher one year and you got set back, you may have a difficult time passing the AP test. So I think that's why we really do need to be conscious of who is teaching, how they're teaching, and effectively looking at this data, not just once a year, but throughout the year probably. Mr. Bates?
And I agree. I think it's a great resource. I think it's a great opportunity for students and for parents. I guess where I'm primarily looking at is I'm looking at some of our data, and we're struggling in our core. I mean, we're not talking about advanced placement. Our numbers are low on English 1 as far as the ones that are excelling right now. And it's equally not too good on the ones that are below basic. I mean, you go down the line, English 2, geometry. So we're struggling in those core classes. We're also struggling on ACT. And I understand it's always difficult to interpret numbers, but what I'm doing is I'm comparing some of our sister counties that have a much higher proportion of disadvantaged students. So by, reading the tea leaves, we should be ahead of them. I mean, just based upon that factor alone and that statistic alone. And so that's just I think it's a great thing. It is absolutely a great thing. But I think there's something amiss on our core that we're struggling with. And we've got to make sure that we double down on those things, because I can take an AP class and it looks great on my transcript, but if I'm not doing too well on my ACT, you better believe those college admissions are going to be looking at there's a threshold there that only gets you foot in the door. Then they start looking at those other things to say, okay, well, you're on the line, let me see if I can push you over into admission. But that's a fundamental thing. That is, to get into college is going to be doing well on your ACT and doing well on your those core classes. So that's just, again, it's not a question of the value of it. It's just a question of, are those students also getting some other benefits from that? And it may be that they're, even because it's a more rigorous course, and even though they're not passing the test, they're still getting benefits from it. And that's an open question for me. I just would like to see more data on that. That would help me with some of those other questions. But I understand it's always difficult to get those things.
Well, Mr. Bates, I think you and I are saying the same thing in a lot of ways. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to how we're teaching before they get into those AP classes. Because if they're not successful, if they're not proficient or mastered these subjects before, we got to do a good job screening on the front end. And it may be something that, a child wants to take a class, but it's a whole different ball game for some of these classes, and it's a good experience. But if that's going to impact our numbers, and we just have to know what we're working with. And I mean, I think that there needs to be a clear path on, if you're going to take AP Calculus, you have to take these classes. I mean, there needs to be a set path. And I think most of those other systems that you're talking about probably have somewhat of a set path of, you don't just decide you're going to take some of these classes. It's preparation. English would be an example. You're reading books in 9th grade that may be covered on the AP exam when you're in 12th grade. But you have to build upon it. And if we're not building upon it, then I don't know that we're going to go up much more than 8 next year. Hopefully we can. K2 information. Or did you have anything else? All right. K2 information discussion. I'd asked for that mainly for an update on where we are on K2 textbooks and where we are on testing. It's my understanding that there had been some communication that they were going to get tested.
So K through 2 resources, we cannot actually order until the state approves our budget. So the minute that we get back that the budget's approved, the purchase order and the requisitions go in, or the requisitions go in.
Do we have materials approved, though?
What
Because
did
I
we
think what-
approve?
I think what we had as far as a budget standpoint was different than what was proposed last year when it came to us with fund balance. They don't align.
I can shed some light on that. We, as far as budget, I think we have $316,000, and $222,000 of that is for K4 resources, which includes K2 plus 3rd and 4th grade. And that is for Ready Math for all kids, K through 4, and that is for Read to Be Ready, K through 4 also. So we're prepared to make an order once the budget is approved. We're gonna go ahead and place an order. And I also brought a copy of a unit starter, so you can see what a unit starter looks like for Read to Be Ready. And I brought a sample set of mentor texts as well that we can pass around. So this is one of the unit starters, and these are a copy of the mentor text, just for you to kind of see where we'll be going with that. But
So where are we on Read to Be Ready as far as those starter ones? I know that those were being developed, was my understanding.
Oh, here it is.
I think there's like
So-
more than that.
We have made some progress. The state has developed several units. As I understand, they have developed, I think, 2 units per grade level up to this point, and they are developing 2 more by the fall. So there should be 4 units by Christmas. And our team, we have had a team of teachers working over the summer to help develop units as well. We have developed units for kindergarten, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. We did not develop any units for 1st, but 1st grade already has 2 unit starters that were developed by the state. So we feel pretty good about that. We had a full day of training with all the elementary schools on August the 2nd for Read to Be Ready. And so our plan is, again, to order the mentor text. We'll be ordering from the Tennessee Book Company. Tennessee Book Company will be the vendor, and they have the best price on the text set, on the mentor text sets. They're about $120 per unit, and it's much cheaper than other companies that we have seen with regards to what the text sets are gonna cost us. So we feel that we're ready to move forward. In the meantime, the pacing guides are out there. The pacing guides are available, and teachers should be utilizing the balanced literacy framework that they've been trained in to move forward. So we feel pretty confident that we'll be ready to rock.
How many units a year should they get through?
I believe it is 10, should be 10 units.
Per
as I understand
year?
it. It's 10 units for the whole year. That's I understand it.
So we need to have 5 units ready by Christmas.
5 units by Christmas, and the state should be ready with that by Christmas, as I understand it. I know.
I've heard that before. Yeah, do we have a plan B?
Plan B again is we have pacing guides, and we should be doing balanced literacy. And we do have text sets in our library that we can utilize, and we have our pacing guides. So that should not stop us from making sure the kids are learning. So,
Okay.
yep.
So what's our curriculum though for K2 when it comes to reading?
Well, Read to Be Ready is
I
not.
think page, I don't know if it's page 3 or 4 from the state says this is not a curriculum.
Right, it's a framework.
It's a
And
framework.
it's a
So where's our
framework.
curriculum?
So we're utilizing a framework as opposed to a curriculum.
So before we purchase a bunch of things, where's our curriculum? I mean,
Right.
you're going to bring something to us and ask us to purchase things that don't fall into a curriculum and just fall into a framework? Is that what you're telling us?
I'm saying this is the state-adopted plan to improve literacy, and some of the schools that utilize this plan, we saw some improvement. We feel confident with it, and this is the direction that principals wanted to move in. And I do have one of my principals here. I'll put you on the spot back here, Mr. Ford. Come on up, Mr. Ford, if you don't mind. You want to speak to it? I'm gonna put him on the spot. Come on, Mr. Ford. Talk about Read to Be Ready if you like.
I'm happy to answer any questions. Wasn't prepared to talk tonight, but I'll do the best I can.
How did we get to this point?
Can you talk about Read to Be Ready?
Let me just ask you this. I think we've heard about Read to Be Ready, and those of us that want to know about Read to Be Ready have had an opportunity to get information on that. But my question is, you got 2 unit starters for each of your grades. What are you going to do if the other 3 don't come in before Christmas?
I cannot speak for all the elementary schools. I can say at Randolph-Howell, we're very innovative, and we have a Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D.
But from a district standpoint, what direction have you been given for those Plan Bs, Plan C, Plan D?
We have a district curriculum guide, and what we have done, we have expanded on that with scope and sequence to really make sure we're hitting essential standards.
And that's at Randolph-Howell. What about every other elementary school and how that overlaps when that child from Randolph-Howell transfers into Mount Pleasant? I mean, this is a district thing. It's not really an individual school thing. I'm sorry.
Can I ask one question?
Sorry. Mr. Beaver?
All right, thank you. Is this right here is just a starter kit, right? Starter unit?
Yes, that's a sample starter unit.
Okay. It's my understanding that there's a complex text that goes along with this. Do we have that? Or will we be getting it, or?
These are the complex tests. The book.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Would you be willing to share your plan B, C, D with the other schools if they?
Of course. We've modeled the PLC framework for the last 2 years at Randolph-Howell. Part of that framework is collaboration. That's just not among teachers at our school. That should be among principals as well, district-wide. So we'd be happy to share that. What works for us doesn't mean it'll work for everybody else.
Right.
And we were one of the pilot schools with Read to Be Ready. So I guess I was trying to be funny and it wasn't taken that way. But with the Read to Be Ready work and being a pilot school, we are a couple of steps ahead of some of the other schools. I think that Baker is a pilot school. McDowell is as well. So we've had a little bit of exposure with this. We did implement some of the unit starters last year in first grade with probably the most success. We also exposed kindergarten, second, and third grade. Fourth grade didn't have any of the unit starters last year, but that has been remediated for this year. The team of teachers that worked on this over the summer actually worked at our library. I would encourage you guys all to come out and see our new library space. We did renovate that over the summer. It's really cool. But anyway, that team, I witnessed some of the work that they did. Tanya Potts led them through that this summer. I think she's now doing something else. But anyway, they did some really intensive work. A lot of the teachers at Randolph-Howell were on those teams. So, I mean, I think we have seen just student engagement and then also the just level of rigor with the lessons has increased. And so you talk about text complexity, that does come with the book selection. There's a very rigorous process that goes through the texts that are selected, not just for the read aloud that the teacher uses, but also for the, I guess, the independent readers that the kids use, the class sets that they have. So I do see some merit in this program as a principal. Most of our teachers do as well.
So for plans B, C, D, what materials are you going to use? Are you going to have text sets purchased for those as well?
Not necessarily, no. When you look at the balanced literacy framework, those different things, there's lots of different components. And so you don't want teachers teaching skills in isolation. And so as we get into that piece, there's going to be different things that go with different plans. I was kind of joking. We just have a plan B and C. But, you know, we'll utilize these books because we were under a grant, so we've already got access to some of these books. So we'll utilize that whatever we go through.
So I'm gonna look at Mr. Gaines. What about title schools? Would they be purchasing for Read to Be Ready, or?
You're ready to run, huh? So at the same time that we deploy Read to Be Ready, when we did the model, when we took the grant on, we tried to look at Read to Be Ready gave us the grant with we had to have a teacher or a coach that would be available 60% of the time at a school. So we tried to be selective in the persons that we chose that, you know, one, we had some Title I coaches that were at that school that they could give that time to that school. On the other hand, we also wanted to figure out where we can expose other schools, non-Title I schools, because we knew we had resources at Title I schools where we could, you know, we could buy some of the text sets and those things like that to support Read to Be Ready. So we used our district-wide coach. She was talking about Tanya Potts at Woodard, and I mean at Randolph Howell. She served there. So the idea is building around that framework, and it's also they're working with teachers to develop units on their own. So, and part of that is our coaches, Tanya Potts, Dana Beck, those people like that, have gone through that training process last year where they work with them to learn how to vet units so that when teachers start to see the framework where we got with the unit starters and they start to develop units on their own, they'll be able to help vet some of those units to make sure that they're choosing the right books in terms of text complexity, that they're centered around essential standards, because this is all about using basically some if you would, science and social studies topics to build units around, to build that engagement, because we understand that kids need to be exposed to more complex text early on and learn how to deal with that. So with that, you just don't leave the skills alone too. We've always had processes in place for children to teach kids when they, you know, when they have trouble with phonics or those things like that. What you don't want to do is go way to that extreme either. So that's why it's a balanced literacy approach. You have to teach kids those skills that they need in those small groups, but also go back to the text and help them apply those skills that they learn into the text. And that theory is that hopefully that will increase achievement in reading. So at different schools, for example, a lot of schools, as they looked at the unit starters and the resources to develop that, well, they went to their libraries, and the libraries reorganized some of the text sets to support the school so they would have additional sets. And out of that, so we have additional units there. And I know, for example, I was at Riverside, and they developed a unit on community. So they took their school-wide behavior plan. They talked about the essential things that kids need to know. They looked at standards that they thought they could teach through that unit. And they centered it around, hey, these are everything we want all our kids to know, school-wide behavior, RTIB, RTI2 behavior, and they developed a unit around that. And that was a good unit that the whole school at each grade level developed that. Mr. Holmes led that effort and tasked him to do that. So they developed that unit, developed the resources, got the books. I think, I'm trying to remember who's there. Virginia is there working with them on making sure that the text was complex and that they were able to still do the same thing at the same time. So it turned out to be a good unit. That, you know, it was kind of a win-win for both of them. They had managed to teach the skills, school-wide behavior plan, and start out with a nice unit. That's just an example. Other schools were working with them to develop those units also as we go along. Of course, the state has those unit starters that kind of guide us. Principals are going to integrated leadership courses, so they're getting the same thing on the leadership side, learning how to look at that complex text and help teachers determine that. And so it is a work in progress, but as Tennessee, you know, their goal is 2025, kids are, was it 2025? Kids will be at 75%. So that's what we're working toward. Questions from there? I don't.
That's helpful. But again, I just wanted to see, I'm curious as to how this is all being handled from a central office standpoint. Like, it helps to hear that the principals are getting the leadership, getting some direction on it. But at the end of the day, I'm just worried that there's going to be certain schools that aren't going to have the tech sets that they need because they didn't develop, because we don't have the units developed. And they don't know, I think you mentioned Tanya Potts. She's at McDowell now. So is she going to be helping with unit starters while she's serving as assistant principal?
Well, also in this year, we have every principal that didn't have a Read to Be Ready person has a Read to Be Ready person now that we're doing with our coaches that have already been trained. They're now training those coaches. So, and that's part of our differentiated pay plan, to use those folks to help do that training with teachers. So we've got that going on too, to expand what we already did. We've got the grant schools, and then now we're expanding that model to implement Read to Be Ready everywhere. So in every school, we're looking at those ideas, how we develop those units. I would imagine Riverside, and I think I encourage them to share that unit with other schools, because we probably ordered the same library books. And that's where they, of course, they did have title, and they had a book room. They were able to gather some resources, but some of those books they gather from the library too. So there are opportunities there to share those units with other schools and continue to develop using those resources that we already have.
Any other questions on Read to Be Ready? Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Testing for
testing. If you guys want to discuss it, one of the things Dr. Wood and I talked about today, and actually this past weekend, was philosophical differences among testing 7 and 8 year olds, standardized testing. I'm not a fan of it. So do not want to standardize test second graders. But if the board wants to discuss it to try to possibly sway my decision is not to test second graders with standardized testing.
Okay. So that's what's been communicated to principals and teachers.
I wanted to have the discussion tonight to see how the board felt.
Okay.
But if the board is agreeable with me, I'm more than willing to send out that information in the morning to say, don't worry about it.
Particularly with the testing that we've had from
Yes,
the
ma'am.
state, I don't really think that there's any value to it that we would get from a second grader that we don't already potentially get or not get from a third grader. That's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
But I do think it's a
And research,
certainly your decision.
Yeah, and research says that standardized testing below third grade is proven to be that you can't get the results out of it. It's not really effective.
Well, I'll just tell you, I'll say too, the other thing is if we are going to test second graders, we need to make sure that they have resources that they need in order, those teachers have the resources they need.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think for them to be tested this year would be very unfair.
Agreed.
Considering the resources that we haven't provided them.
I think testing second graders at any time would be unfair, but I completely disagree with you. No.
You disagree with me?
No, completely agree with you. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. We'll move on to class sizes, unless y'all want to take a break or y'all want to press on.
I don't care.
We'll press on. Since we didn't get this information until about 2 o'clock today, I was hoping that you guys could kind of lead this discussion on the class sizes, because whatever we looked at over the weekend wasn't the correct information. So,
Thank you, Chair Parker. This afternoon, I think Dr. Marzak reached out to you regarding updating the information that is currently on the board agenda with regards to class sizes. We were asked to bring this information, and so this information is here. I think what you wanted to see was this summary provides you with information regarding any courses that are at 15 or below. That was the information that was requested. I do want to say one thing about capacities. This information came from our data system, iNow, and sometimes the default on those class capacities is just the default at 40. We would never, ever at any time have 40 kids in an elementary school, so that's just the default number. But the number that you see on the enroll side that shows you what's there is actually what is there. In some of the courses, you can see we have the courses here by school, and some of those courses you may see low numbers because the course may be a SPED course or an ELL course, or it is an intervention course where strategically you have low numbers in a class so that you can maximize the learning that would happen in the class. But other than that, I cannot think of any other real or true justification for some of the numbers that may be a little low. Yes.
You've got dual enrollment listed. Those are just students who are taking dual enrollment. It's not a class size. I mean, I just noticed.
Correct. It's just how many are enrolled
It's just how
in the
many
section.
are on dual enrollment. Doesn't mean the teacher's class is that size. So
Right.
there are some things here that are not classes. They would fit in different categories. Is correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And dual enrollment is another example.
So
Thank you.
these are simply the classes that fall below 15 in a class.
Correct.
And even though some of them, guidance counselors and all, that's not a class, so it's kind of,
You may have some situations where a counselor is coded to a section and they have students listed under them for some reason
yeah.
or another.
Okay.
Correct. But I think what you really want to see is what core courses look like and what your elective courses look like. In our elementary schools, we staff at 20 to 25. In our middle and high schools, I think you'll see where some of the gaps are, where you see classes that may be at 15 or below. But this is pretty comprehensive, and it gives you a really good look at some of that.
Can you also provide information on the large side as well? I know we talked about this seems to address some of the small numbers, but I know that we also had, at least from the previous data, it looked like there were some really large classes at some middle schools or high schools versus other middle schools and high schools.
Correct. We do have, Whitthorne would be one of those specifically. We're going to wait until the 20th day, once we get the 20-day counts in, to look at providing additional staff members and support to those schools that would need additional positions based on enrollment numbers. But after the 20th day, we'll make those decisions. But we are looking at those decisions. I'm looking at those classroom numbers now, so we are looking.
Ms. Bernstein?
So from what I understand, September 20th is the date, the enrollment date? Okay. Does the state averages and max in a classroom, it doesn't matter until we get to September 20th? August 20th.
Yeah. August
Okay.
20th day of school.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So up till then, we can be over? Is that what you're telling me? Over the state max?
Correct. It's really never great. It's never really great to be over, but at the 20th day, we'll have a better idea of how things shake out and how the dust settles. Typically, after 10 days, you drop what you call your 10-day no-shows. And so at the 10th day of school, you drop all the people that you've never seen before off of your rolls, and then that's going to settle things a little more. And then at the 20th day of attendance, you turn in your first attendance reporting period to the state for accountability purposes. And so at that time, we'll have a better and clearer picture of where we really are as far as student enrollment at that time. So we feel that by late next week, we'll have a really good handle on where we are, and we can start looking and making some decisions.
Okay, so I guess my question is, from what I understand, in our middle schools, 4th through 6th, so 5th and 6th grade, they need to have an average of 25 for those two grades or single grades. I think it's a 2 grades.
I think it is 2
And
grades.
then
It's an
no
average.
class can be over 30.
Correct. 30 to 35 in grades 7 through 12.
I'm talking for
And then
5th and
at
6th
the young-
grade in the
at-
middle
yeah.
schools.
5th and 6th grade really ought to be around 25.
So we have quite a few schools that are over right now, according to this, over that maximum number in a classroom.
You may have a couple of classes that may be over, but the average of all the classes may
Well,
not
you're
put the school
giving us
over.
average here.
So the averages of the classrooms may not, the average for the school may not put them in that situation. But we're looking, and we're going to make some decisions
But you
based on.
can't have one class over. is from what I understand. You cannot have one class over 30.
Well,
Yes.
go ahead.
Could you not have
Yes.
a 32 in one class and a 28 in
28 in
another?
another.
And it
That's the
averages
way
out
it
to-
averages out.
30.
No,
Right.
no. If I'm reading this correctly, you cannot have more than 30 kids in any one class.
As I understand it, it's the averages of the grades combined. It's the averages. That's the way we are.
Yeah, it's no problem. You're thinking about high school, because that's where you're from. So when you do the average class size, grades 7 through 9, 10 through 12, the average is 30 as per the BEP booklet. But the average class size for grades 5 and 6 is 25. You cannot have a maximum class over 30.
So
A
no-
class over
yeah,
30.
no one class can be over 30.
No, ma'am.
We have quite a few of them in here.
Mhm.
I'm just,
And
you
that's
know.
and that's what we'll have to determine.
Okay.
Either moving people around the district from lower enrolled areas or hiring teachers to offset that number.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually, what'll happen is we'll actually get a letter from the state that says that this number is currently over. It exceeds the BEP maximum. You have to hire a teacher. That happened about 2 years ago with Hampshire. We had one first grade teacher. We had to hire an additional first grade teacher because the state said if you don't hire another teacher, you're not going to get your BEP payment in October.
Okay.
You don't have a choice.
All right.
So there are checks and balances in place to make sure that the numbers are meeting state mandated guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Woodard, you seem to have a feeling that some of these were low. What's too low, in your opinion, on these class sizes? I can ask Dr. I can ask Dr. Martin, Zach, if you want me to, but I guess what I'm saying is when I look through this and I see like 1 out of 25, you know, 1 kid, 2 kids, I mean, are these like electives that they're doing like after school with these teachers, or are these classes in the middle of the day where we literally have 1 person in a seat?
So, in some of those, you do have some unique situations, you know, such as the dual enrollments and things like that, where they may be assigned to a teacher, but the kid is actually going off campus.
I'm not talking
But
about dual enrollment.
But when you have an elective course, or if you have a core class, math, science, language, social studies, and you see low numbers there, it means that we could actually increase those class sizes and collapse a section. And then once you count the number of sections that you can collapse, you could potentially save a position or 2, or save several positions by collapsing sections. Now, if it's a course that's an honors course, you know, I think you want to be around 18. And again, you asked for my opinion. If it's a math course, I think you want to be around, I mean, what's ideal? 16. If you can afford it, 16 in the math would be, you know, ideal about that. But again, who could afford to have class size? That'd be ideal. What is too small? If we're talking about CTE, I think in our CTE classes, we need to have our CTE classes as full as we can get them, which would be 20, so that we're maximizing, you know, what we get in for the value of CTE. And I know that's an area that you all have mentioned before, where we have extremely low classes and low numbers, and that's of concern. And so, it's one of the things that we're looking at. It's on the radar.
If I could just take that a step further, because I don't know what is the right number for any of these classes, and I don't know what the special circumstances are. I do know we just went through a very lengthy budget process where we had to do we didn't just do belt tightening. I think we had to tighten our socks and everything else too. So, in light of that, I would expect that central office and the principals are going to be coming back to us, because it seems to me like this, from your opinion, if that's the rest, that we're going to have to look at streamlining, I guess that was the word you used, of these things, just from a simple, we can't afford to do some of these things. Now, I think these are things I would love for us to be able to do if we could afford them, but I think it's clear that we're going to have to make sure that we're being efficient when it comes down to these things. And again, I don't know which class is which. I don't know which one is supposed to be 4 people, which one should be 12 people. I don't know. I am expecting central office and the principals and the leadership to come up with an efficient use of the resources in terms of that. And granted, we've already started this year. I don't know how that impacts right now, but it needs to be a game plan moving forward that we get to that point where we are efficiently using that. Again, if we can add that later, if we find pots of money somewhere where we can draw from that, that would be great to expand those further. But I think it's our current financial situation is that we're going to have to streamline these things by necessity.
Yes, sir, Mr. Moore. What we'd like to do is create a district-wide staffing formula, and then you take the school's projected enrollment and divide it by the district staffing formula, and then that creates a teacher allotment number. And so then schools would have to build their master schedule based on an allotted number of teachers that they cannot exceed. And so once we give them an allotment, then they build upon that allotment. And then anything they have, and this is going to hurt the first time we do it. It's basically starting of right sizing. It's going to hurt the first time we do it, but then we'll do it every year after that, and then it won't hurt anymore. What that will create is a list of employees who may be displaced, but then they get shifted to other schools where there's a need. So if school A, if Stan's school is up in projected enrollment, but I'm down, then I'm slated to lose 3 or 4 positions, and then he's slated to gain 3 or 4 positions. We're going to spread employees around so that everyone remains employed, but we shift the resources, and then all the schools are sized appropriately. That way we can look at maximizing what we have and then eventually saving some dollars, and it will be an immediate savings.
Can I add one more thing on that?
Sure.
And I don't think anybody here is talking about it, because there's been some discussion about huge class sizes or going to maxing this out. I don't think anyone on the board, and I don't get the feeling from central office that that's the direction we want to go. But I think trimming off on the end there, on the bottom end, where they're professionally, they seem like to be they're too low a number. I just want to be clear on that. I don't get the feeling from any of my fellow board members that that's the direction we want to go. We want to maximize. If we can have 35, we want to cram 35 people in it every time. That's not the direction I'm wanting to go, and I hope that that's the direction you guys aren't going either.
I just want to point out, when you talk about right sizing, in a class of 30, that one teacher teaches. When you've got a class of 10, it takes 3 teachers to do that. So when you right size, that's what you're really doing, is equalizing those things. So it is tough decisions that may have to be made. But right sizing is not, I mean, that's the way it ought to be. If you have this ratio at this school and a bigger ratio at the other, then you're going to right size that one up to where there's equality here. We just need to be clear about that. It's going to affect in different ways. But 35, no.
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 Yes, ma'am. Ms. Kinzer, I agree completely. One of my concerns is that, we have our unit schools and we have small schools and then we have some large schools. And so what I plan to bring you at some point is 3 staffing ratios. Most districts just have 1, but I think even if we had 1, I think we would still have some inequity based upon the kinds of schools that we have and based upon our sizes. But what I want to show you is 3 different formulas, and I want to kind of, in maybe the next work session, kind of pick your brain and show you what I'm thinking, and then see if this would be feasible. And again, there'll be some real hard conversations that we'll need to have around this, but I think that we ought to have a formula for our smaller schools. I think we need a formula for our unit schools and our medium-sized schools, and one for our large schools. But again, that formula would dictate what the allotment is for a school as far as building their master schedule and the number of teachers that they will be allotted. And so I plan to get you that information pretty soon.
Mr. Bates?
I was just going to say, I think nobody's going to disagree with an approach to try to make things fair. That's what every school deserves, fairness. And so I think that's what the things that Dr. Woodard is saying as far as trying to come up with a objective, fair way of making sure that resources are allocated throughout the district so that everybody's treated fairly, I think is something we should have done a long time ago. I'm not sure why we're just now looking at those things. I do think, when we get into questions of fairness, I think that's the thing, we just need to be fair. Everybody just needs to be fair to each other. I do think that we have to recognize with the unit schools, that's a composite. So it's not really, we talked about earlier comparing apples to apples. When you look at some of the numbers of the unit schools, you have to take into account that 1/3 of that population is elementary students. And so the ratios are naturally going to be skewed somewhat because of the ratios of the state mandates that you, as far as the class sizes. So I don't think it's really fair to compare a unit school with a high school, for example. I think it's some sort of compilation of that. And I think there's a way of trying to figure that out in a fair way. But I just think we always have to kind of keep that in mind that that is a compositional thing. But I do like, at the end of the day, you know, when we figure out a system that is fair, of telling the principals, you know, look, this is what your allotment is, and you need to figure out how to make it work within your school that best serves your population. And I think principals are capable of doing that, and I think other districts are do that all the time. Dr. Woodard, I think you even mentioned maybe at one of the meetings that maybe that's the kind of the paradigm or the system that was in place in the system that you come from, that's not a uncommon thing that a principal learns that, hey, because of the reallotment of, you know, how resources are divided, you may have 2 less teachers this year. And so then that teacher, then the principal can make the decision of, okay, where do I want to allocate my resources? Am I struggling in the earlier grades, and I would rather have a little bit more resources at the elementary level versus maybe some of the higher grades, and I can push those numbers a little bit more. So it gives the person that's boots on the ground, they're going to know their school better than anybody as far as, you know, what works best for them. But I think we as a board can come up with a uniform, fair way to allocate our resources. I do think, too, to dovetail on the comments by Mr. Moore, I don't think that we're looking at starting to just lay off a bunch of people. I think it's more of a recognition that we're in a growth paradigm. And this could be, you know, a silver lining for us, that we do have some flexibility to be able to deal with growth. And so the way I look at this is maybe in the next few years, we may be looking at kind of a freeze, and being able to work with the resources that we have so that we don't have to hire as many employees. And so we're able to do things within house. But that's not going to last forever. With growth, I mean, we got to recognize that we're still going to have to do some additional hiring as well.
Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Woodard?
One other thing I think we have to think about is the concern for principals, and I support them in this, and I understand their concern, is that when we talk about staff reductions or reductions in force, it impacts their pay. And so earlier we had some discussions and conversations around the salary scale. You know, my thought would be that maybe as we make this adjustment, we look at paying based upon student enrollment, which I think is a more stable measure. I mean, for the most part, a school's enrollment won't fluctuate that much, not tremendously. I can't think of a school that's lost, you know, 200 or more students in a single year. So for the most part, enrollment will stay pretty constant, but the number of teachers that you may have, you know, could change based upon what those projections are. So if you're losing personnel, 4 or 5 personnel a year, that's going to impact your salary. And so I know that's a concern for our principals. I think it's something we ought to think about, and I think that we want to maybe look at changing the scale potentially so that they would not be impacted by the fact that teachers may be shifting, particularly in the year that we start this. I mean, the first time you do this, it is a big hit, but after that, it all starts to make sense. But it is an adjustment for the district, but just something to think about.
Mr. Moore?
I just, Dr. Woodard, do you think you could have, as far as just going back to the class size portion and your models that you're wanting to propose, are you thinking next month or the following month? I just would like some defined when we to expect we could talk about this.
I'd like to bring it back to you next month if that'd be okay.
Sounds
those,
great
those
to me.
class sizes, we could just continue this conversation if that'd be okay.
That'd be great.
Yes, sir.
I will say that just from my own perspective, and obviously everybody has a different perspective, but I think 3 is too many. I mean, I feel like, well, I'm not saying that we have to go to 1. I recognize that our district is a little bit different than probably the district that you came from. But I do think that, you know, if you have Algebra 1 at one school and you have 30 kids, and you have Algebra 1 at another school and you have 10 kids, we got to figure that out. 'Cause If we've got 3 classes of 30 at one school and we've got 3 classes of 10 at another school, I mean, the workload's not the same for those teachers. And I don't know that there is equity for those students as well when one kid is one of 10 and one kid is one of 30. So I do think that we need to, I mean, some of these classes should not make, and we just need to know that. But some of these classes need to be bigger to make it more effective. And that may change the look for some schools, but I mean, I feel like if we're going to look at having some kind of formula and standardizing something, we can't just say, well, we're going to have large schools, small schools, and unit schools. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's going to get us exactly where we are now.
Williamson County has, it's online where you can see their right sizing. I was really fascinated by that as well, so you might want to look at that, and I'm sure other systems as well, too. I know that there's one thing about big schools is they have to have 2 librarians and so many guys. There's a difference there, but I do agree if we want equity, the child in the class of 10 is going to get a whole lot more time with their teacher and curriculum as opposed to one at 30. So to me, to one system, to make it equitable. That's what I feel like. And when we're saying that in elementary and all the way through, that we want to make sure that these teachers are doing the best job that they can. A teacher that consistently has to have 30 in every class, and we're talking in high school that on a 7-period day, that's 5 classes of 30 if that's the case, whereas it may be 5 classes of 10 each in another school. So that's not equitable to me. It's not good for the kids in that class of 30.
To go with that, if I were asking Dr. Woodard, if I could, wouldn't mind hearing you give the pitch for why there should be 3. But I'm just listening to other board members. You may be prepared that the direction may be somewhere between 1 and 3 on that. So, but I would definitely be interested in hearing if you want to do your sales pitch on why you think that's an appropriate model. But it may end up looking different by the time the discussion's over.
Well, let me just say, I think that we need to know, I mean, you were able to give us what you think is a reasonable class size in these instances. That should be applicable to every school. I don't know why it should matter if it's one school versus the other school. If you know what good instruction looks like, and if good instruction looks like 10 kids in a classroom, then we need to figure out what 10 kids in a classroom looks like. If you think good instruction may be 20 kids in a classroom for certain classes, then we need to figure out what that is. I'm just expecting you as the expert to tell us what good instruction is going to look like and how we fund it. Anything further on class sizes? We'll continue this discussion next month. Thank you, Dr. Woodard. Finance.
I have a question about finance. We haven't seen any financials since May. When can we see those end of June financials, fund balance, any of that? It's been May.
She's currently closing out the books as we speak. The books are supposed to be closed out by August 31st. So once the books are closed out, she'll have the end of the year financials, and then
and then we'll have July as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she'll have all of that wrapped up all into one. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, but we can't get, I mean, I understand that, but we kind of get into a little tricky situation there where we're always waiting for the end of year. So, I mean, can we get some of the previous months? Because normally when I do my books, because I do the end of year and middle of year as well, just wrapped mine up. A little smaller, but the point is that you should at least have the previous month in most instances wrapped up. So we'll be able to get that. And I'll say it from this term. It's concerning not getting anything.
Okay.
So are we thinking that we will have financials available to look at in greater detail at the August board meeting?
I'll ask Ms. Yagliano, because I'm checking on that. Going back to the June board meeting, I saw that we had May, but you haven't, but we haven't gotten June and July. Okay, I'll ask her.
Anything on the budget amendments that are attached? Yes.
I'm just one member, but there's no way that I can vote on any amendments going forward until, I get up-to-date financials. I mean, that's just a fundamental thing that the board needs to be getting on a regular basis, to be looking at our financial.
Madam Chair, could I speak? I think there's only one budget amendment. I'm the one who submitted it. There's two. Okay, I don't know about but one. The one that I submitted is actually some money that's remaining from a bond. It's the bond that was issued for the train improvements under Phase 1. It was about a $4.5 million bond. There's $19,000 left in the bond, which you approved last month, I think, for some HVAC improvements, but we can't spend that money until it's moved because of the close of the year, till it's moved out of this one fund, which is called Committed for Support Services, into the building improvements. This is not anything, school funds. It can't be spent for anything but what the bond was issued for, but I can't spend it till we make this technical move from one account to another. This budget amendment was written by the auditors. They wrote it for us to tell us how to do this. And so if you don't approve it, we just can't move forward with those improvements you approved. So that may help. To let you know that, because this one is a technical. It's not
I think
taking
yours
any.
is a technicality, and I think Mr.
Yeah.
Gaines has one too that's a technicality as well.
Yes.
To
And then the
correct
other one is
something.
from a grant, state grant, CTE grant.
I think though, I mean, I'll let people ask questions of Mr. Gaines on his budget amendment, but I think based on what I'm hearing from board members is we're gonna have to vote up or down on these and not put them on consent unless we have some financials. Mr. Gaines?
That's fine. It's just a correction. We received an allocation after we did the budget amendments last month, and in order to close, we need to do this budget amendment, otherwise we'll be out of balance, and that will be an audit finding. So we, as stated today, we talked to the auditors about what do we need to do to correct this, and this is what they suggested, that we go ahead and ask you to do budget amendment before year-end close, so that we can, you can't predict when you get additional allocations. I guess at the state level, they try to push those out as quick as they can, so that's what happened, and we're gonna add those funds to the budget, and they'll go into, our fund balance reserve, and they'll, we'll reuse them again next year. They'll go in as a carryover.
Mr. Pennings?
I understand where you're both coming from, but we need the financial reports every month. I mean, we have always got them every month until now. And we need them every month. It's kind of hard to vote to spend money if you don't know how much money you have. I have to balance my checkbook. I don't know.
Well, I agree. I think we've waited month after month for correct financials. And it's, every time we vote on some of this stuff, I've got a big question mark up there on top of my brain that says, is this accurate information or not? Ms. Gagliano has had enough time to be able to give us accurate figures. And we keep hearing month after month, well, we had to wait until this, we had to wait until this. Well, I'm tired of waiting. So if we can't get some accurate financials, I'm tired of voting on stuff.
So for Ms. Gagliano, we have to close FY18 to get June, and here's why. Some of our stuff comes in July, and it has to be posted back until June because June 30th was the cutoff date. So we have to actually close out the books in order to get June because June is impacted by July. Her target date at this point right now is August 30th. She has to get the new budget in Skyward after approved in order to get July going. And the target date for that also as well as August 30th. So June is impacted by July and can't do July until we actually get the Skyward budget in and actually updated and rock and roll and or moving forward, if you will. So June is incumbent upon the other one.
She gave me a August 16th last time we asked about this, that she would have it all.
Okay, I'll ask her about that.
August 16th, so now we're moving it forward.
So now we're saying that it's gonna be September before we have accurate figures.
You said August 16th, ma'am?
I thought that's what she said, because the payroll goes out the 15th, she said.
I'd just like to say I've been on the board 10 years, and I have never before had a month or 2 months where we haven't got financial.
Dr. Brown, do you want to speak to your budget amendment?
Actually, our budget amendment is not a budget amendment. We earned a grant. Last year, I wrote a grant, and we received it, and it's for $20,000. And Ms. Gagliano had us estimate to our best ability where that money will go. The $8,000 is for site licensures, and that's to basically help offset the cost of getting our teachers licensed for our kids to test at the schools. That $8,000 may be used or it may not be used. Just depends on how many teachers need those site licenses and how much they cost. As far as the $3,000, $2,000, $3,000, so forth, basically we determined on the size of the school, because there's really no way to estimate that, but she wanted that done. So we did it to the best of our ability. We have no clue how many students will test for an industry certification at any given time. At that time, please be aware, let's say Central High School has 20 more than what they were expecting and another school has none. We will need to do a budget amendment because we have no crystal ball. That's about the in and out of that. So this is estimated to the best of our ability. And it's truly based on size of the school, because I do not know how many students will be actually sitting for an industry cert. So, but the money's there.
So it sounds like you really don't want us to do this budget amendment just yet.
Well, if you don't, I'm not sure that she'll put our money where it needs to be.
Okay.
So I don't know, and I'll have to leave that up to, well, I mean, if you can text.
So we do a budget amendment knowing that we're gonna have to do another budget amendment.
But notice at the very top, that is an estimated budget. So I don't know. This is the first time we've had to do this for a grant. So we did the best we could do with that, so, on the estimation. So. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So it's an estimated budget, so.
All right, well, we'll just leave all of those on to talk about at the board meeting then. Take a break if that's okay with everyone. 10 minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and start on policies. There's some items that are there for final adoption that were there the last month. Any objections to that going to consent? All right, and then next is superintendent evaluation. And I know, Mr. Bates, if you don't mind speaking to that.
No problem. So everyone should have received an email where I just went through and made some suggested revisions to the policy. You should be able to see those changes in red. My proposed changes, it's pretty straightforward, is to have our annual evaluation in November. We could still have additional evaluations if, in order to comply with the superintendent's contract. But my purpose in thinking It's pretty straightforward, is just to, in November, at least we would have the state data in hand and other testing data. And we can, when we do the evaluation, we'll have objective information so that hopefully we can focus on, it's not subjective issues, although, we certainly give subjective input as well. But I would think for us as a board and as a district, we want to try to be objective as possible. And we also want to try to further our mission as much as possible. So if we're looking at that data, at the end of the day, I think what we as a board, we want to start seeing happen is our math scores improving, our reading scores improving. So it allows us to stay focused if we have some information in hand. But I know it's just been frustrating for me in past evaluations that I'm being asked to perform an evaluation for a year when I don't really have any numbers in front of me. So that's very frustrating for me because I'm a numbers driven guy. So.
Any comments, other board members, on the proposed changes? Any comments from you, Dr. Marzak, on change?
With the language that Mr. Bates sent today, looks agreeable to me. Each November, as well as any additional times agreed to by the board and the director. The board will meet as a body to evaluate the performance. Okay. Yeah, I guess because what we'll have to decide is, basically, if we're talking about evaluating the superintendent, whether it's me or somebody else 10, 15 years down the road, is because this is going into policy, is if you're going to be evaluating somebody based on standardized test scores, do you want to evaluate based on achievement or based on growth or based on a combination of two? What scale are you going to use to determine what's satisfactory, what's below satisfactory? So there's going to need to be some back and forth to determine what's acceptable for both the board and for the superintendent. So.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's reasonable, when you're looking at data, there's different aspects that have to be pointed out, and I certainly think that's fair and reasonable. My primary goal is to just have that data so you can have those discussions so that, okay, we're looking at the numbers, maybe on the surface it doesn't look good, but then when we start drilling in, maybe there are some positive things, but at least we have that we can kind of sink our teeth into so that we can do that analysis and we do that thinking. So that's my primary goal with these proposed changes, is just where we have that data available to us.
Sure.
And to echo that, I think my intention from hearing when Mr. Bates proposed that wasn't to use the test scores as a kind of like just a score in and of itself. It was just simply, as he said, to have the data to kind of pile on with any other information you've made over the last 6 months or year, to go into that. It wasn't to be a separate thing. I don't know what everybody else was going. That was the direction I was going as well, Mr. Bates.
All right. See no other lights. Move this to consent. Zoning and facilities.
Madam Chair, we have the regular reports on there. There's an update from our architect ESA on the progress on the 2 new schools and the mechatronics lab, which of course we actually had the ribbon cutting on last week. Today's Monday. Last week on Thursday. But there's a report on all 3 of those projects. There's also reports here from Hewlett Spencer on the 2 new schools as well. I can answer any questions or go through those, whichever way you prefer.
I think if anybody has any questions, that'd be a good time to ask Dan.
Are we on schedule?
Yes, we do remain on schedule. They still tell me that we're going to be able to be in the new schools when school starts. Yes, ma'am. Now, I will tell you there are things they're doing to adjust the schedule all the time. And if you look at some of the things, everything, but they still convince me we're going to make it. So.
All right. The last item was the discussion of the Spring Hill annexation, and Mr. Hall, Alderman from Spring Hill, had sent us some information on that. I don't know if there's any questions or any action that the board wants to take on that.
And we really didn't have an attachment for that. Really,
Right.
just was just a. So I mean, was there stuff sent to the board? Because I don't know of
There was,
anything.
no, there was an
The email,
email
okay.
that just said that somebody from the school had reached out to him and asked if if the school could be annexed into the city of Spring Hill. And, he said, we can't really take it just from like one teacher or one parent at the school. It needs to be from the body that owns the school. So the application would have to originate from us. But he did agree that the fees would be waived and all of that, so. Mr. Moore?
I would just like, since we have some more time to talk about this, or for them, if staff, if it would be possible to just clarify with Bruce, I'd like to know any impact on it. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure if there's any, especially if there's any financial impact on our end at all. And there has been some question on it, may have been discussion if it's even possible to, I know he feels like it is, I just, before we put too much effort or energy into it, I would rather make sure we're not getting into something that may impact us in some other way. So that's kind of my concerns on that.
Yeah, I echo what Mr. Moore says, and I drive that route every day, and I'm pretty sure I see the the Columbia city limit sign after the high school. So I don't know if it's in the city limits or not legally, so I that's something we'd have to check out too, but I'm pretty sure that the.
South of it or
North of it.
north of it?
Yeah.
It's in.
Yeah, Tommy, you can probably answer that better.
I think the city limits is not equal. On David Moore's side of the road, the city limits goes further out, and took in some other subdivisions there. On the right side, coming from Keaton Road, the property owners were annexed at one time, and then they went and had a request to be de-annexed. And then some of that included the school, the property the school bought. And so, but they're not equal as far as the distance coming from Keaton Road.
And Mr. Dudley, I'll just add, the only thing, and we have not done any research, but I do believe that the school property is not in the city of Columbia, it's in Murray County. And the reason I say that is because when we get our alarm permits, we have to get the alarm permits from whatever jurisdiction the school is in, and we get the alarm permit for Spring Hill High School from Murray County, not from the city of Columbia. So we get, from city of Spring Hill, the schools that are in the city limits, from city of Mount Pleasant, the ones that are from the city of Columbia, but then the ones that are in the county, we get. And so I'm pretty sure it's Spring Hill High School and the unit schools are the ones that we get the alarm codes from Murray County, the alarm permits from Murray County. I'm pretty sure of that. And I have not confirmed that, but that's my memory.
I will say that in the conversations that I had with Mr. Hall, I said, well, it does make sense to me that, Spring Hill being Spring Hill, so that, when you're filling out the address, you're saying Spring Hill, Tennessee. But he said that that's a post office issue, and even if we were to go through the annexation process, he did not think that would impact the mailing address, because obviously that would incur some additional costs if we were going to change all of the letterhead and whatnot. So I just want to make it clear that I don't know that we're going to have any impact on the post office. Ms. Morency?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, I have no problem with this. I just want to make sure that it doesn't impact us financially. That's, if there's anything that we have to do, or taxes wise, I don't know, but I guess. Anyway.
We are not subject to any taxes.
Right, I understand
We are
that.
not subject to any fees. Mr. Woolever might be able to, but like for when we do building permits and everything are not issued. The school system is a separate, basically almost municipality, and we don't pay fees to any of the.
Well, we don't pay taxes, but we do pay some fees. There are some, it's like stormwater.
Oh, we do pay stormwater fees. That is correct, which are through the city. Stormwater is the only one that I know of, which is kind of a federal regulation that the cities enforce.
Sewer, I'm not sure about, and solid waste, but there could be some impact. That's the only thing I can come up with.
Okay.
Financially. So that might be part of the agreement, or at least be able to calculate those.
And we can certainly do some work on that if you'd like for us to, and see what the difference what we're paying now and what, if those would be different. If we do some renovations there, that's when some of that might come into impact. I mean, there's some stormwater fees that you pay on your regular utility bills, but as far as building permits and things, we don't pay for those regardless of where we build.
They have to give us some kind of plan of services before the annexation, so we could use that to figure out what might be applicable.
Okay. So we can work with Mr. Wolver on that if you'd like for us to pursue.
I think just so that we know what the financial costs are, I don't think it hurts. I don't know that anybody wants to take you off of a project that you're working on in order to do it, but as your time allows, if you could get back to us at some point with that information, we can, I think Spring Hill High School's been this way for a long time. I don't think that another year, not that it's going to take that long, but if that.
So just to be clear, we won't be expected to bring that back by the board meeting in 2 weeks. Okay.
No.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
September, October, as your time allows, I think. That work? All right. Next item is donations. Randolph Howell. I guess that's what Mr. Ford was here for. Sorry.
Well, actually, I can share with you that. It's just good news. And Mr. Ford and his staff have worked very closely with their PTA. I want to make sure it's a PTA. And they are donating new playground equipment. They're working with one of the companies that we have worked with in the past and called Game Time. They have quotes that you can see in here. It includes professional installation. There will be a certified playground installer will be installing it all. It comes with a 3-year labor warranty. And you can see they've showed you it's about a total of $40,000 worth of equipment here. Is that right? No, $50,000 worth of equipment. There's 3 pages.
3 pages of it.
Here, and then they show you pictures of what's being installed. So it's really it's quite a testament to the work of Mr. Ford working with the PTA, and the PTA is donating all of this through fundraisers that they've had. So it's a real plus for the school that you all need. And this is just really information for you of what's being done, because again, they're meeting all of our criteria as far as using the professional installers and doing the things that they would need to do with the equipment. So
awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, Stan. Other business, Dr. Marzak?
This is required by contract. I can go through it now if you want me to, or we can wait till the board meeting. It's your call.
If it's just reading it.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
At the end, I've got my recommendations. So.
Well, why don't you just get to the recommendations and we don't have to.
Sure.
If you can just skip to the recommendations.
Sure.
And then
Ms. Shirley, can you click on Dr. Marzak's presentation, please? And then once it opens, go all the way to the end. Best bets. That's it. Last slide, please. There you go, all the way to the end. There you go, keep going. There you go, perfect. Okay, so K through 12 Insight is a customer service platform tool. So if we wanted to gather some more information, other than I said just by phone, but also by email, we may be able to work with K through 12 Insight. It kind of floats on top of your website, and then when somebody asks a question, it actually routes to the appropriate personnel. So if there was a question about curriculum instruction, it would go right to Dr. Woodard's department, and there's kind of like a dashboard that keeps up with that. So if we wanted to go that route, that may be an option. Discovery Education was to be implemented with the change from Board Builder, but as we went through the budget process, that's kind of where we are. And then STEM Connect is a good middle school tool to get students thinking about STEM careers. So if we do find some funds, and if we can go back to it, that would be a good best bet for our students. Move This World is really big in social emotional learning. They've been working in this world for about 15 years now, and actually had an opportunity for them to meet with Dr. Killen. And we have some schools that are actually starting to do social and emotional learning work. And so that may be an option for us to start to move through that. But do not see an opportunity for Atlantic Research Partners. They're doing all their work up in Chicago and Illinois, and doesn't really apply to what we're doing. So that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you. The next items are our bids. Considering the discussion that took place regarding the budget amendments, do we want to, I don't know that any of these are going to go on to consent until we have a chance to review financials, so you want to just save those discussions until the board meeting?
And I do have an update, Ms. Kinzer. Karen said she was going to try to work to get them done by the 16th. So she's working diligently to get to that point, but she's using the 30th as kind of like a deadline date. She'll try to get that as soon as she can.
Prior to the board meeting would be good.
She's going to try her best to do it. Yes, ma'am.
I think she may just want to, I don't know if any of these contracts are time sensitive, but if we don't have those financials, it may impact some of those being able to go through. So you may just want to be looking at your plan Bs on some of those.
That's what I'm telling her, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you for us, I'm looking, Dr. Wooder might be able to speak some copy papers for schools to have copy paper. So some of them have some of them doesn't until we order that. And we also have on here the solid waste, our solid waste renewal September. So that's the people haul off our trash. So, you know, I don't know what our backup plan would be for who empty our compactors. And, you know, you approved that for a year. And so, I mean, it's the annual renewal. So those are the time-sensitive things that I can think of on our list. I don't know about some of the others.
All right, we've got one on there as well. It's the automated substitute, because we'll no longer have parallel after August 31st. So that contract, September 1, that's the software that the teachers will use to go in to put their absences in and to request a sub. So that's something that we will need approved if possible.
Yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Reaver. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Breeden. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the special education contracts are also time sensitive. Those are fiscal year 19 expenditures, so those will be in the approved budget, and those are services that we have to provide to children. Otherwise, there will be some issues that Jake and I could discuss with you if I don't provide services to children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, on the copy paper.
Yes, sir.
Has that increased any from last year?
As far as the cost or the budgeted amount?
The amount of paper.
Dr. Woodard actually included those things in his budget. I don't think this is much of a change from last year, but it was based on what the schools requested, wasn't it? The amount of copy paper. So I would have to look back to see how much we spent last year. I don't know what the total was, but I can get that information by the board meeting for you.
Okay, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I can
Right.
get that.
Thank you.
I think it was on there.
Pardon me?
I think it was on the.
It's, well, if I can pull it up here, the right one. I know I've got it here somewhere.
5.31. 5.31, is that the one?
Maybe it's right here. I had it. The bid information I know includes the list per school.
Last year's bid amount for 8.5 by 11 copy paper was $23 per case, 500 sheets per ream, 10 reams per case. Total amount spent for paper last year
Oh,
was $64,000.
it's on there. Okay. Well, good. Thank you. 64,000, and this year the amount that's asked for is 69,940. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for. I signed this, so I should have remembered that. That's been a day or two. I apologize because I did read it when I signed it.
So you said about a $5,000 increase?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything on the bus advertising revenue?
If I could just give
Sure.
could give you a quick report, just an update. What you'll see there in your packet shows actually that so far with the ones we've signed up for, it is an annual revenue of $36,602.50 that we've generated so far from bus ad sales. Since this was actually done, we found out there are 2 more advertisers who've signed up, Youth Villages and Fast Pace Urgent Care Mount Pleasant, which will bring the total annual revenue to $37,867.50. Now, we have collected so far, basically for fiscal year 17-18, $19,006.75. That money is in our revenue for 17-18, since that was not moved in any expenditure account to be expended for anything. That will roll into our fund balance. And so you can decide, do you want to just let it go into fund balance, or do you want to, we had talked about originally possibly collecting it for a year and then coming back and pulling that money out and spend it for something specifically. But at this point, no decisions have been made on that. So that's where it's at. It's gone into our revenue.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from board members on that item? Everything else is FYI. Any discussion on that? If not, we're ready to, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I don't want to make it longer. I just had a question on the bid 19011, the purchase from Instruction Partners District-wide Professional Development. It said in there that 10 schools were going to, I don't know who I should be talking to, but anyway, they said.
Okay.
It said that there were 10 schools. I just wanted to know, how do you choose the 10 schools that will get professional development?
This is a potential contract with Instruction Partners to provide some really in-depth coaching and professional development for some schools that had low academic achievement.
Okay.
We want to really hone in and do some deep dives and some walkthroughs, and really taking a look at what's going on in some of the schools that have been persistently low performing. And so, yeah, we have chosen some schools based upon TVOS data and based on achievement data as well. And we're looking at years of persistent low performance. That was the criteria that we used to select the schools that we're going to do a deeper dive with.
We intend to pair the other school teams as we do those walkthroughs. We'll pair administration and other leadership as we do those walkthroughs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more unrelated item to that. I had sent out an email asking, and it actually, the superintendent had provided a draft letter to from some discussions we'd had the other day about sending something to the state. I know several other districts have sent something to the state about the testing fiasco, and I know Dr. Marzek had presented that, a draft copy of that. I don't know if anyone had had a chance to read that and had any thoughts on it. I mean, just personally would love to, I haven't dissected the wording of it yet, but I really would love to kind of get on board with letting the state know that we're not happy with the mess they've created. I didn't know if anybody else, like I said, had a chance to read the letter or had any thoughts on that, but I really would like to send a message to the state that they've created a mess for us, and I'm not happy about it.
I agree with Mr. Moore. I read the letter, and I think it's a good thing to send to the state and let them know. And I think every school district in the state ought to send a letter telling them how happy we are that they've created a fiasco for the last 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm. So the letter was written actually in conjunction, Dr. Woodard, Dr. Preninger, and myself. So basically what we did is we looked at what's happened over the last 3 years, and we've tried to sum up basically to the state, this is what we would like to see happen. So basically what we talked about is kind of following in line with what other superintendents across the state have said by putting a pause on TN Ready for at least the next 2 years. This will give us a possibility to evaluate the current vendor, norm question sets, build confidence in future online assessment platform, and we're asking for the department to create teacher and principal working groups to give feedback to the department. And we're encouraging this because we believe that getting it right is better than doing it quickly. We basically confirmed that the legislature held teachers and school systems harmless this year, but unfortunately, the state is still reinforcing TVOS, even though the test scores they're saying we're holding you harmless for a year. That's one area that the legislature didn't really attack. And I talked to one of our representatives, Michael Curcio, about this. and he read the letter, and he said, Chris, you're right. That's something we should have attached on. That's something we should have gone to. He said, so he said, I read your letter, and I agree with where you and the school board want to go. So we're asking for the state to allow schools to nullify their TVOS scores the same way they're allowing teachers and principals and LEAs to nullify their test results. And then what we're also asking for the third one is going back to that drum again of there is a measure that is used across the country that is a good measure of student success, and that's the ACT. So again, asking the legislature and asking the commissioner, because this could go to the governor as well, that if your big goal of Tennessee Succeeds is having all students score at least a 21 in the ACT by 2020, then why don't we focus on the ACT? Why are we having to do two different measures with one measure that everybody in the country uses and another measure that it seems like the only people that care are the Court of Public Opinion in the state of Tennessee with EOCs? So what we're asking is for them to reconsider again using the ACT as the sole measure for high school performance. And what we'll see is more students getting into post-secondary education, more students getting scholarship opportunities, which means they have less college debt, and also meeting the governor's initiative of a statewide average of 21 by 2020. So we're asking them to consider these requests and to take them seriously, because we believe right now that the testing situation in the state of Tennessee has become a fiasco. It really has. And restoring confidence and getting people back on board to take these tests seriously has been difficult and problematic. So I'm ready to send the letter on. I think the letter is good. It's sound, and it's based on current data. Would just like the board support as I send the letter.
I would say send it.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm not
No.
voting, I'm saying.
No. And
Just
this
saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I don't have any objection to it coming onto the board agenda and us having a chance to vote on it, but I don't know that you can send a letter on behalf of the board without
wouldn't.
there being any action at that point.
I wouldn't.
So-
I would send it on behalf of myself, the superintendent of schools in Murray County.
But I think that Mr. Moore wanted us to make a point of saying that we as a board are not happy with the way that the testing has been done.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're welcome to send your letter now if you want to do that, but then we as a board need to compose our own letter then if that's the case. Mr. Moore.
That's a valid point. I mainly just wanted to get us to kind of thinking about it. And again, I definitely would be up for some discussion on what the wording of whatever letter would be. I just personally feel like it's something I would like as a board for us to get behind, reinforcing that we're not happy with how the state has handled this. So whatever that looks like, whether it be that specific letter, whether Dr. Marzak sends that letter on his own behalf and we choose to draft something ourselves, I'm open to whatever that is. I just would encourage other board members, if you think that's a direction we as a board would like to go, then let's consider how we can get with that and what we want that to look like.
Well, my thoughts are, and I agree, we do need to do it, but I think we need to do it as a team, that
Yes, sir.
show unity instead of Dr. Marzak sending his and us sending ours,
Can we put this on the agenda for August agenda and vote on it? Can you wait 2 weeks to send
Yes,
it?
ma'am.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it would mean more, like Denny said and Mr. Moore said, that if we were all together on your letter or a similar letter, whatever, is signed by the school board and the superintendent of schools, and send it all as one letter.
This would, other than Knoxville, instructing Bob Thomas to send his email, you would be the second. This did not come from the school board in Shelby County or Nashville. Those were sent by the individual superintendents, but you would be the second system to do that behind Knoxville Public Schools. So that would definitely be, as Mr. Beaver said, that would definitely be a show of force, definitely, to tell the state that you take this very seriously.